He was never supposed to be on that floor. He was never supposed to open that door. And he was absolutely never supposed to see her like that. Ryan Walker was a maintenance technician, a man who fixed broken things for a living while quietly watching his own life fall apart one unpaid bill at a time. Olivia Sterling was the most powerful woman in the building, maybe the most powerful woman in the city. And the second their eyes met across that private office, something cracked open in both of them, something neither one of them was ready for. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one goes deep. The elevator doors opened at 6:47 in the morning, and Ryan Walker stepped out onto the 32nd floor carrying a tool bag that had seen better decades. He wasn't supposed to be there. The work order in his back pocket said, Floor 31, Suite C. A tripped circuit breaker in the secondary server room, logged at 6:15 a.m. by overnight security. Simple job. In and out before the executives arrived, before the hallways filled up with people who looked at maintenance staff the way they looked at furniture. Useful, invisible, not worth acknowledging. But the elevator, an old Otis unit that Sterling Technologies had been putting off replacing for 3 years, had a button panel with a sticky 1 key. Ryan had pressed 31. The elevator had decided 32 was close enough. He realized his mistake the moment the doors slid shut behind him. The 32nd floor was different. Even the air felt different, quieter somehow, like sound itself had better manners up here. The carpet was thicker. The lighting was warmer. There were no fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, just soft, recessed panels casting everything in a glow that made the place feel less like an office building and more like somewhere decisions got made that affected people who'd never set foot on this level. Ryan stood for a moment, tool bag in hand, looking both ways down the hall. "Wrong floor," he muttered. He turned back to press the elevator call button and noticed the small brass placard mounted beside the hallway entrance. Executive Suite, 32nd floor. Access by authorization only. He looked down at his shirt. His name was embroidered in blue thread above the Sterling Technologies maintenance logo. That was probably enough to get him fired if the wrong person walked by, regardless of how he got up here. He hit the button and waited. The elevator did not come. He waited another 30 seconds. Still nothing. Somewhere below him, the cables and pulleys that kept the old Otis running were doing whatever they wanted, as usual. Ryan exhaled through his nose, picked up his bag, and decided to find a stairwell. Simple enough. Go down one flight, do the job, be invisible. He followed the hallway to the right, past framed photographs of Sterling Technologies milestones, the company's founding, product launches, a ribbon cutting where a much younger version of the company's founder stood grinning next to city officials. The last photo in the row was different. No ribbon, no handshakes. Just a woman behind a glass desk, looking directly at the camera with the kind of expression that said, "I know exactly what you're thinking, and I've already thought past it." Olivia Sterling, CEO. 30 years old, which Ryan had found quietly astonishing when he first started working here 4 months ago. He'd seen her twice from a distance, once crossing the lobby in a way that made the whole room rearrange itself around her, once through the glass wall of a conference room where she was standing at the head of a table full of people who were nodding with the nervous energy of people who very much wanted to keep their jobs. He hadn't exchanged a single word with her. That wasn't unusual. In 4 months at Sterling Technologies, Ryan had learned the unspoken geography of the building. There were floors where you existed and floors where you serviced, and the trick was knowing which was which and never confusing the two. He found the door he thought led to the stairwell at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. It was not the stairwell. It was an office. The office, the corner suite he'd seen in the building's layout during his onboarding, the one that occupied the entire northeast corner of the 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides looking out over the city's skyline, still wearing the gray-pink of early morning, a massive glass desk, a sitting area with low furniture and charcoal and cream, and against the far wall a full-length mirror and a garment rack hung with what appeared to be an event wardrobe, and Olivia Sterling, in the middle of changing out of her gym clothes into what looked like a blazer and pressed trousers for whatever early meeting had apparently required her to be in the building before 7 in the morning. She was in the middle of pulling a white blouse over her shoulders when the door opened. For approximately 2 full seconds, neither of them moved. Ryan's brain ran through a very fast sequence of options that basically amounted to drop dead, disappear, or back out of the room immediately. He chose the third one and executed it badly because his foot caught the edge of the door frame on the way back, and the door swung wider before he could grab the handle. And he was now, for a single humiliating moment, more in the room than out of it. He started. Stop, she said. Her voice was flat and even. Not startled, not screaming, just firm in the way that people are firm when they've decided that reacting is beneath them. He stopped. Turn around, she said. He turned immediately, facing the hallway back to the room. He could hear the soft sounds of her finishing what she'd been doing. The quiet slide of fabric. The small, efficient movements of someone who was not panicking because she had apparently decided not to panic, which Ryan found both impressive and deeply mortifying given that he was currently standing in her doorway, unable to move because she hadn't told him he could. You can turn around. He turned slowly, already reaching for the first words of an apology that he'd been building in his head. She was fully dressed now, blazer on, standing in front of that full-length mirror with her arms at her sides, looking at him in the reflection the same way she'd looked at the camera in that hallway photo. Direct, measuring, giving nothing away for free. Your maintenance, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Ryan Walker. I'm on the day shift, floor technician. I got off on the wrong floor. I was looking for the stairwell. I genuinely didn't know anyone was wrong floor, wrong door, wrong time, she said, still looking at his reflection rather than at him directly, which somehow made it worse. Yes, all 3. Maintenance crew doesn't have authorization for the 32nd floor. I know, the elevator, the button stuck. I pressed 31. It stopped here. I should have gone back down immediately. I'm sorry. She turned away from the mirror then and looked at him directly for the first time. He had the thought, briefly and not particularly helpfully, that photographs didn't quite capture the quality of her attention. In photographs, she looked powerful. In person, she looked like someone who had already run 3 calculations about you before you'd finished your first sentence. You've been here 4 months, she said. That landed strangely. She knew how long he'd worked here. Yes. Night reports say you've covered 2 double shifts in the last 6 weeks on short notice. Once when Chen called out sick, once when the Hendricks situation required overnight work. He had no idea what to do with this information or why she had it. Yes. She looked at him for a moment longer, then turned back to the mirror and picked up a small pin from the tray on the nearby shelf, fastening it to her lapel with the practiced efficiency of someone who didn't waste movements. Go find your stairwell, Mr. Walker, she said. The door you want is 2 down on the left. It's marked, but the sign is partially blocked by the fire extinguisher cabinet. Facilities has been asked to fix it twice. She picked up a folder from her desk without looking at him again. He stood there 1 beat too long. That was a dismissal, she said, not unkindly. Right. Yes. He picked up his tool bag from where he'd apparently set it down at some point without realizing it. Thank you. And I'm genuinely sorry. She didn't respond. He left. He found the stairwell exactly where she'd said, 1 door past where he'd looked, sign half hidden behind the red extinguisher cabinet just as described. He stood in the stairwell for a second before he started down, just letting the adrenaline move through him until his hands stopped being faintly ridiculous. By the time he reached floor 31, he was already fairly certain that was the end of it. He'd be walked out by security before lunch. Maybe not even that dramatic, just a quiet note in his file, a meeting with his supervisor, an apology that satisfied nobody. He found Suite C, popped the circuit panel, reset the tripped breaker, confirmed the secondary server room had power, logged the work order, and was back in the main corridor by 7:15 a.m. His supervisor, Dale Purcell, was waiting for him by the equipment bay. Ryan braced. "You're early," Dale said, not looking up from the clipboard he was annotating. "Finish the 31C call." "Good. We've got a backlog today. HVAC filter swap on 28, 2 busted outlets in the finance bullpen on 14, and somebody on 19 reported a water stain under the drop ceiling that might be a slow leak from the 21st floor bathroom." Ryan waited. Dale looked up. What? I accidentally came out on 32 this morning. Elevator stuck the button. I was looking for the stairwell, and I opened a door I shouldn't have opened. Dale's expression didn't change right away. Then, how far in the wrong door are we talking? Far enough? Dale put the clipboard down slowly. Was anyone... Ms. Sterling was in the office. She was... Ryan stopped. She sent me out. She didn't seem particularly interested in making it into anything. But I figured I should tell you before she did. Dale looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked the clipboard back up. Go do the HVAC filter swap, he said. That's it? You came and told me. That's something. If it comes down from upstairs, I'll deal with it. He made a notation. Don't go back on 32. Wasn't planning to. Ryan took the clipboard for his morning assignments and went back to work. Bam. The day passed the way most of his days passed. In motion, solving small problems before they became medium ones, moving through the building's mechanical guts with the kind of quiet competency that nobody noticed unless it stopped. He replaced the HVAC filters on 28. He replaced both outlets in the finance bullpen, which turned out to have been improperly grounded to begin with, a fire risk that had probably been sitting there for a year. He found the water stain on 19, cut into the drop ceiling, traced it back to a cracked wax ring on the toilet flange in the 21st floor men's room, and had a plumber called and scheduled before end of shift. He picked Emma up from school at 3:15. She was waiting on the curb with her backpack in her lap, the way she always waited, patient, self-contained, a 6-year-old who had learned early that sometimes you had to wait, and it was better to wait quietly than to make it someone else's problem. Ryan hated that she'd had to learn that. He wasn't sure how to unteach it, or if he should. Hey, Bug. Hi, Daddy. She climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in. She was working on her independence. How was your day? Interesting? Interesting good or interesting bad? He thought about it. Olivia Sterling's eyes in the mirror. The way she'd pulled out that folder and not said another word while he stood there being useless. Interesting weird, he said. How was yours? We did fractions. She made a face in the rearview mirror that communicated exactly what she thought of fractions. Fractions are useful. Fractions are confusing. They're both, Ryan said, and pulled out of the school parking lot. He was 32 years old, and he had been doing this, just this, the two of them, the pickup line and the apartment and the frozen dinners that he made look less frozen with varying success, for 4 years. Since Emma was 2 and her mother, Jess, had decided that the particular version of her life that included Ryan and a baby was not the version she wanted to keep living. He didn't hate Jess for it. He'd spent a while trying to... It would have been easier, probably, to have someone to be angry at, but eventually he'd run out of energy for it. She was gone. Emma was here. The math was simple, even if fractions were confusing. His sister Carla, who lived across the bridge in Westside and called him every Sunday regardless of whether he answered, had told him last year that he needed to start living his own life instead of just maintaining everyone else's. You are 31 years old and the only thing you do for fun is fix things, she'd said. I like fixing things, he'd said. That's the problem. He'd hung up and then called her back 20 minutes later because he always did, and she'd said, I just want you to be okay, Ryan. And he'd said, I know, and neither of them had felt particularly resolved about any of it. He was okay. He was fine. He had a daughter who said things like interesting good or interesting bad, and that was enough to get through most days without dwelling on the parts that were harder to name. The call came 3 days after the incident on 32. He was in the middle of the water leak follow-up on 19. The plumber had done the wax ring replacement, and Ryan was re-examining the ceiling to assess whether the affected tiles needed to come down or just dry out, when Dale found him. Walker, you've got a meeting, executive floor. Ryan came down off the stepladder. What kind of meeting? Personnel. HR is up there. Dale's expression was difficult to read. Don't be late. The elevator worked correctly this time, depositing him on 32 without editorial comment. A woman named Patricia from Human Resources met him in the hall, led him past the framed photographs in the corner office to a smaller meeting room where a third person was waiting. Not Olivia Sterling, a man named Marcus Chen, who Ryan recognized as the VP of operations, the person 2 layers between Ryan's world and the executive suite. Marcus was 50-something, compact, with the kind of alertness that suggested he slept well and never stopped thinking. "Mr. Walker, thanks for coming up." He gestured to the chair across the table like Ryan had a choice about sitting in it. "I'll get right to it. We're creating a new position, Executive Support Technician. The role is specifically to manage technical maintenance and systems monitoring for the executive floor and the 2 floors directly below it. It's a single point of contact position for anything technical in these 3 floors, reporting directly to the VP of operations rather than to floor supervisors." Ryan looked at him. "Okay. We'd like to offer it to you." Patricia slid a single-page document across the table. Ryan looked at it. The salary line was roughly double what he was currently making. He kept his face neutral with some effort. "Why me?" he asked. Marcus didn't blink. "Because you found an improperly grounded double outlet in the finance bullpen that could have started a fire. You traced a ceiling water stain back to its source in a single afternoon when the previous technician had logged it 3 times as inconclusive, and you self-reported a protocol breach the morning it happened without being asked." He paused. "Those are the reasons in the file. Would you like the other one?" "Sure." "You didn't make it a bigger deal than it was. When something awkward happened, you handled it like an adult and moved on. That sounds like a small thing. It's not." Ryan sat with that for a moment. Outside the meeting room's glass wall, the 32nd floor continued its quiet, expensive existence. "I'd need to look at the schedule," he said. "I have a daughter in 1st grade. Pickup is at 3:15. Marcus nodded. "The role is structured as 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. If anything comes up outside those hours that requires your attention, there's an on-call supplement." He tapped the paper. "The specifics are in there." Ryan looked at the salary figure again, then at the schedule. 8 to 4. He'd be at the school curb before the bell rang. "I'll take it," he said. Patricia made a note. Marcus stood and extended his hand. "You start Monday," he said. His first week in this new role was a different kind of learning curve. Not the technical side. He understood the building systems better than most of the engineers who'd designed the upgrades, and the executive floor turned out to be mostly the same infrastructure wearing more expensive clothes. The learning curve was behavioral. People on 32 were accustomed to a specific quality of service, fast, discreet, unobtrusive. They didn't want to know how things got fixed, only that they were fixed before they became noticeable. The audio system in the main boardroom had been cutting out intermittently during presentations for weeks. Ryan found the issue in 90 minutes and had the bad connector replaced before the afternoon scheduled board call. Nobody thanked him. Nobody needed to. The call went smoothly. That was the job. He had 2 brief interactions with Olivia Sterling that first week. Both were in passing. Once when she came out of her office while he was checking the thermostat calibration in the hallway, once when they were both waiting for the elevator at the end of the day. Both times she acknowledged him with a nod. The way you'd acknowledge someone whose name you'd confirmed was attached to a face you now recognized. Nothing more than that. He preferred it that way, or told himself he did. What he actually noticed in those 2 brief interactions was the quality of her tiredness. It wasn't the tiredness of someone who'd worked hard that day. It was older than that. Settled in around the eyes, carried in the shoulders, the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the only person in a room who can't afford to let the room see it. He recognized it because he'd worn it himself. Cheaper version, different context, but the same basic shape. He kept the observation to himself, logged his work orders, and went home to Emma. Book. The second week, she stopped by his work cart. He was in the 32nd floor corridor running a firmware update on the building's HVAC control panel. Routine maintenance, required standing in the hallway for 20 minutes while the system cycled through its restart sequence. He had his phone out, reading through Emma's latest teacher report. Satisfactory, working on listening when instructions are given. Apparently fractions were still an issue. He heard her footsteps and looked up. Olivia Sterling was holding a coffee cup and looking at the HVAC panel with mild curiosity. "Is that going to affect the temperature on this floor?" "For about 6 minutes while it restarts," Ryan said. "Then it'll regulate back. If it gets uncomfortable, I can—" "It's fine." She looked at the panel, then at him. How long have you been doing this? Maintenance work? He hadn't expected a question. 11 years. Started as an apprentice right out of high school, got my certifications over time. You went into it deliberately? My dad did HVAC. It wasn't romantic, but it was steady. She looked at him for a moment with that same measuring quality she'd had the first time, but slightly less defended. Like she was allowing herself to be curious about something instead of just evaluating it. Do you like it? She asked. The question surprised him enough that he answered honestly instead of reflexively. Yeah, I do. There's something satisfying about a system that wasn't working and then is. You can see the fix. He stopped. It's not complicated to feel good about. She nodded once, slowly, like he'd confirmed something. That must be nice, she said. Not bitter, just stating a fact about a quality she didn't currently have in her own life. She walked on before he could figure out what to do with that. By the end of his third week, the shape of her day had become familiar to him, the way the building's rhythms became familiar. Not because he was paying special attention, but because attention was part of the job. He knew that she was usually the first person on the floor, arriving between 6:30 and 7. He knew that she ate lunch at her desk most days, that she had a standing call at 2 p.m. on Tuesdays that always ran long, that the tension in her jaw was visibly different on days when the board was in versus days when it wasn't. He also knew, because the executive assistant Sandra had mentioned it offhandedly one morning, that Olivia hadn't taken a day off in 14 months. Not a vacation day, not a sick day, not even a long weekend, Sandra had said, with the resigned bewilderment of someone who'd stopped trying to convince her. Ryan had filed that information next to the tiredness around her eyes and had not known quite what to do with the total. The fourth week, he saved her a public embarrassment. The board was scheduled for a full-day strategy session in the main conference room. The AV system, which had been working fine all week, developed a failure in the presentation display 60 minutes before the session started. The display was driven by a proprietary system that the building's previous tech team had installed and never properly documented. Most technicians would have needed 2 hours and a manual to diagnose it. Ryan had noticed 3 weeks ago that the proprietary system had a quirk. It dropped signal at certain ambient temperatures when the HDMI on board reached a specific threshold. He'd written it up in a maintenance note that nobody had read. He had the fix implemented in 37 minutes, tested and confirmed before the first board member arrived. Olivia found him packing up his tools in the conference room at 8:55, 5 minutes before the session. Sandra told me you got here early, she said. Had a hunch about the system. Wanted to check it before anything was at stake. She looked at the display, which was showing the presentation cleanly on the wall screen. You documented a potential failure 3 weeks ago. I put it in the maintenance log, yeah. The log that nobody reads. Pretty much. She was quiet for a moment. What would you have done if you hadn't caught it in time? If you'd gotten here and it was 40 minutes before the board session? He thought about it honestly. Told you immediately, given you an accurate time estimate, and worked as fast as I could. There's no version of that scenario where I pretend the problem is smaller than it is. Something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, not the kind of shift that you'd catch on camera, but there, behind the measured control, like something had temporarily stood down. That's the right answer, she said. It's just the answer. She almost smiled. He'd remember later that it was almost not quite, because almost was interesting on a face that he'd mostly seen in its controlled professional mode. Go get breakfast before this starts, she said. You've been here since 7. He went. He sat in the employee break room on 28 and ate a granola bar and thought about the fact that Olivia Sterling had just told him to go eat breakfast, like he was a person whose welfare was worth noticing. He couldn't entirely explain why that landed the way it did. He thought about the tiredness around her eyes. He thought about the way she'd said that must be nice when he'd told her he liked his work. He thought about Emma, who was at school right now learning fractions and waiting for him at 3:15, who deserved a father who didn't walk around with his attention split between what was in front of him and whatever this was starting to be, whatever small thing was forming in the space between professional and something else. He finished the granola bar and went back to work. By the 6th week, they were talking. Not the way he talked to Sandra or to Marcus Chen in operational briefings, or to the other technicians he crossed paths with in the service corridors. Differently. Slowly, in small segments, a question she'd ask while he was working, an observation he'd offer about something in the building that had nothing to do with the immediate task. A brief conversation that sometimes ran a minute and sometimes ran 10 and never felt entirely like what it technically was, which was a CEO talking to a facilities technician. She asked about Emma one afternoon, after he'd mentioned the school pickup in passing to explain why he needed to leave by 3:45 on a day when a monitor calibration was running long. How old is she? 6, first grade. What's she like? Ryan thought about it. Serious, patient. She's got opinions about things, and she'll hold them quietly for a long time before she says them out loud, and then she says them very precisely. He paused. She asked me last week why some people are mean, and I didn't have a good answer. Olivia had looked at him steadily. What did you tell her? I told her most people are fighting something, and some of them fight badly. She accepted it. I'm not sure I do. Olivia was quiet for a moment. That's better than most adults would manage, she said finally. He didn't ask her anything in return that day, but the conversation stayed with him, and it was the first time he thought about the fact that he didn't know very much about what Olivia Sterling was fighting. He found out some of it slowly, not through anything she told him directly, but through the texture of her days. The calls that left her standing at her window for 20 minutes staring out at the city, the board members who visited her office and left her quieter than they'd found her, the evening when she was still at her desk at 7:30 and Ryan, finishing a late repair on the server room cooling unit, passed by her open office door and saw her sitting with her forehead in her hand and a financial report spread across the desk that even from the hallway looked like bad news. He slowed. She looked up. Long night? He asked. She looked at the report, then back at him. My father built this company from a 3-person startup, she said, unprompted, like she was continuing a conversation she'd been having with herself. He handed it to me 4 years ago when his health got complicated. The understanding was that I would protect it and grow it and make decisions he would have made. She paused. And the other understanding? Ryan asked quietly. She looked at him. That some of the people in this building were waiting to see if I couldn't. He stood in the doorway and didn't try to fix it or minimize it or offer the kind of easy reassurance that people offer because it's easier than sitting with something. He just acknowledged it, the way he'd learned to acknowledge things that weren't fixable with a replacement part or a firmware update. People do that, he said. They do. And you're still here at 7:30. Something that might have been dry amusement moved across her face. I'm still here. Then so far you're winning. She looked at him for a moment. Then she closed the financial report. Go home to your daughter, Mr. Walker. He went. But he told Carla about it on Sunday, in broad strokes, on the phone while Emma was watching cartoons in the next room. The CEO, Carla said, in a tone that contained a great many things. It's nothing. We talk sometimes. She asks about Emma. I'm doing my job. Ryan, it's nothing, Carla. You haven't voluntarily told me about a woman in 4 years. You're telling me about this one. He didn't have a good response to that. Just be careful, Carla said, more gently. Not because of her specifically, because of you. You give a lot, and you don't always notice what it's costing you. I'm fine. I know you're fine. Fine is not the same as happy. He switched the phone to his other ear. In the living room, Emma laughed at something on the screen, a sudden bright sound in the apartment, the kind of sound that recalibrated everything around it. I know, he said. That's all, Carla said. That's the whole speech. Just know the difference. He was checking the server room cooling unit on 32 when he noticed it the first time, a small anomaly in the event logs for the building's security system. A brief gap in the camera coverage for the executive floor's main hallway lasting 4 minutes and 17 seconds from 11 days ago. Cameras didn't gap. They looped if the memory was full. They showed static if they were damaged, but they didn't produce clean 4-minute blanks unless someone had interfered with the recording software. He stared at the log for a while. Then he wrote it up in a maintenance report, flagged it as a potential security anomaly, and sent it up to Marcus Chen. Marcus replied 3 hours later, "Thanks for flagging. We'll have security review it." That should have been the end of it. It was a gap in a camera log. Could be a system glitch, could be anything. But Ryan kept thinking about the word gap, about the fact that it was 4 minutes and 17 seconds long, and it was on the executive floor, and it was 11 days ago, which was right around the time that some of the tension he'd been noticing in Olivia's daily patterns had shifted from the ambient kind to something sharper. He didn't do anything with the thought. He went home to Emma, made pasta, helped with a fractions worksheet that was apparently still a work in progress. But he kept thinking about the gap. Upset. It was a Tuesday when things between them stopped being just professional and became something neither of them had a clean category for. He had been calibrating a new sensor installation in the corridor outside her office. She'd come out 3 times over 2 hours. Once for coffee, once to speak with Sandra about a scheduling conflict, once apparently just to stretch her legs, and each time they'd exchanged a word or two about something inconsequential. The monitor calibration. The weather. A noise from the server room that had turned out to be a loose panel cover. On the third exchange, she'd lingered slightly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? Not going to college, taking the technician route?" He considered the question seriously, the way he tried to consider questions that deserved it. "Sometimes. When I was 22 and some people I went to school with were starting to have what looked like different versions of their lives." He set the calibration tool down. "But I think I confused regret with comparison. They're not the same thing." She was quiet. "What made you ask?" he said. "I went to college," she said. "Graduate school after that. Business, finance, corporate strategy. Everything on the path you're supposed to take to run a company like this." She looked out the window at the far end of the corridor, the city spread out below them, October light coming in flat and long. "And I still don't always feel like I know what I'm doing." "I think that's probably normal." "Is it?" "I think anyone who always feels like they know what they're doing is either not doing hard enough things or not being honest with themselves." She looked at him directly for a long moment. "You're very direct. Does it bother you?" "No." She said it without hesitation. "It's unusual, though. Most people on this floor tell me what they think I want to hear, even when they know better." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she said. Simply, plainly, like she'd been waiting for someone to just agree with her about it. They stood in the corridor for a moment that was probably 30 seconds but felt like more, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who have stopped performing at each other and are just, temporarily, being quiet in the same space. Then Sandra appeared at the far end of the hallway with a tablet and an apologetic expression that meant the 2 p.m. call was starting. And Olivia Sterling straightened, and she was the CEO again, all the controls sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Thank you," she said. He wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. She went into her office. Sandra followed, closing the door behind them. Ryan picked up the calibration tool and went back to work. He stood there for a moment, sensor in hand, and made himself be honest with himself about what he was feeling, because Carla had told him to know the difference, and he was starting to. It wasn't nothing. He packed up his tools at 3:30 and drove to school. Emma was on the curb with her backpack, patient as always. "How was fractions?" he asked. "Better," she said, with the careful restraint of someone who wasn't ready to declare victory yet. "Yeah," Ryan said. He pulled out of the parking lot and pointed the truck toward home. "Me too." End of part 1. The camera gap stayed in the back of Ryan's mind the way a loose wire stays in the back of a wall. Invisible, unconfirmed, but there. And the kind of thing that becomes a problem precisely because it's easy to ignore. Marcus Chen's security team reviewed the log and came back with an official assessment of probable system error. No follow-up required. Ryan read the 3-sentence report that Sandra forwarded to his maintenance inbox, read it again, and then saved it in a folder on his phone labeled Building Notes, because he didn't have a better reason to keep it than the feeling that he should. He was not a security professional. He was not an investigator. He was a facilities technician who was very good at noticing when systems behaved in ways they shouldn't, and a 4-minute 17-second gap in executive floor camera coverage was a system behaving in a way it shouldn't. The official explanation might be correct. System errors happened. He knew that. But he also knew that system errors left traces: random memory corruption, clock drift artifacts, buffer overflow signatures. They had fingerprints. He'd looked up the specific log format for the building's security software at home one evening while Emma was asleep, reading through the technical documentation on his phone with the same focused attention he gave everything he was trying to understand. The gap in this log had none of those fingerprints. It was clean. Too clean. He filed it. He went back to work. He kept the folder on his phone. Doesn't. November came in cold and decided to stay that way. The 32nd floor developed a heating inconsistency in the northeast corridor. The run of offices closest to the exterior wall, where Olivia's corner suite was located. Ryan diagnosed it as a zone damper that had partially seized, restricting airflow to that section of the building. He had it repaired in an afternoon, but the repair required ceiling access in the corridor directly outside her office, which meant his work cart and a stepladder were parked in her immediate vicinity for about 3 hours on a Thursday. She came out twice during that time, and both times walked around his equipment without complaint. On the second pass, she paused. Is that why it's been cold up here? Zone damper. Should have been caught on the last maintenance cycle. He didn't make excuses about whose schedule had missed it. It was just a fact. It's been cold for about 3 weeks, she said. That's about right for a partial seize, gradual enough that people adjust their behavior, wear an extra layer, close the door, instead of logging it. She looked at the ceiling opening above his ladder. Do you like being in the ceilings? He laughed. It came out before he could decide whether it was appropriate. That's a specific question. I'm curious. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Not the defensive posture, but the comfortable one. The way a person stands when they're not performing anything. Most people who are good at their work have a specific part of it they like more than the others. He thought about it. I like the diagnosis part better than the fix part, honestly. The fix is satisfying, but the diagnosis, figuring out what's actually wrong from a set of symptoms that could mean 3 different things, that's the interesting part. You'd have made a decent doctor, she said. I don't have the patience for people being wrong about their own symptoms. Whereas buildings can't argue. Exactly. Buildings don't tell me it's probably nothing or that they feel fine. She smiled at that one. Actually smiled, not the almost she'd managed in the conference room weeks ago. It changed her face noticeably. Not dramatically, just it made her look less like someone doing a job and more like someone who was, for a moment, just existing. People do that to me too, she said. Tell me things are fine when they're not. And you know they're not. Usually by the time someone tells me it's fine, it's been not fine for a while. He looked at her from the ladder. So what do you do? I wait, she said, and I watch, and eventually something breaks in a way that can't be minimized, and then we deal with it. That sounds like how I find most of the real problems in this building. She looked up at him, and something shifted in her expression, a small, quiet recognition of the parallel they'd both noticed simultaneously. I suppose it does, she said. Then her phone buzzed in her blazer pocket, and the moment closed, and she glanced at the screen with the slight tightening around the eyes that meant something required her attention. Don't let the ceiling fall in. Do my best. She went back into her office. Ryan climbed back up the ladder and thought about what it meant that a conversation about zone dampers had turned into something he was going to think about for the rest of the day. He already knew what it meant. He was just pacing himself. Dead. Emma's parent-teacher conference was on a Thursday evening, which meant Ryan had arranged to leave at 3:15 sharp, earlier than usual, and had told Sandra the day before so that if anything came up on the floor, Marcus Chen's general maintenance backup could handle it. He was packing his tool cart at 3:10 when Olivia came out of her office. Leaving early? No judgment in it, just noting. Parent-teacher conference, Emma's school. Something moved through her expression, the same quality he'd noticed a few times before, a careful interest that she didn't entirely suppress. Is everything okay? With her? She's fine. It's routine. He pushed the cart toward the service corridor. Her teacher says she's doing well, but she tends to wait to participate until she's completely certain she's right. Olivia walked beside him for a few steps toward the corridor. That's not the worst quality. It's not. But I want her to know it's okay to be wrong out loud sometimes. He paused at the corridor door, hand on the release. Took me a while to figure that out myself. How long? He looked at her. Still working on it. Olivia's mouth twitched slightly. Me too, she said. He pushed through the door and heard it swing shut behind him, and he stood in the service corridor for one moment before heading to the elevator, just letting the quiet absurdity of his situation settle over him. He was a 32-year-old facilities technician having the most honest conversations of his adult life with the CEO of the company where he worked, in corridor spaces between maintenance calls, and he was very aware that this was not something he had a template for. He went to the parent-teacher conference. Emma's teacher, Miss Reyes, confirmed what he already knew. Emma was bright, precise, and waited too long to raise her hand. Ryan sat in the small chair across from the small desk and nodded and asked the right questions, and thought about the word careful and how it was both a virtue and a kind of self-protection, and how his daughter had learned it too young. She talks about you a lot, Ms. Reyes said at the end, in the tone of someone trying to give a compliment efficiently. She said last week that her dad fixes things when they're broken. She said it like it was the best job in the world. Ryan was quiet for a beat. She's biased. Maybe, Ms. Reyes said, but kids at this age don't bother saying things they don't believe. He drove home thinking about that. The first time he saw the edge of what was actually happening at Sterling Technologies, it came through a work order. In mid-November, he received a logged request to inspect the structural mounting hardware for the main stage lighting rig in the event hall on the 25th floor. The event hall was used for product launches, investor presentations, and company-wide meetings. A large open space with a raised stage and professional-grade rigging for lights and audio, the kind of room that cost money to maintain properly and generally held its value. The request was routine. Lighting rigs needed periodic inspection of their hanging hardware, the bolts and brackets and safety cables that kept heavy equipment suspended above the heads of people who expected it to stay where it was. Ryan pulled the work order, got the lift from the equipment bay, and went to work. He started with the perimeter rigs, working methodically inward. Most of the hardware was in good shape. Some surface rust on secondary brackets that he treated and documented, one cable with light fraying at the attachment point that he flagged for replacement. Standard maintenance findings. He got to the primary center rig, the main cluster of 8 high-powered spotlights positioned directly above the stage's speaking position, the spot where any major presenter would stand, and stopped. The primary support bracket had been modified, not visibly damaged, not corroded or worn. Modified. Specifically, the load-bearing bolt assembly on the northeast anchor point had been partially unthreaded, not loosened the way vibration loosens hardware over time, unthreaded deliberately with a tool. The bolt was still seated in the bracket, still holding the load, but it had been backed out to the point where the remaining thread engagement was about 30% of the designed load capacity. Under static conditions, it would hold. Under dynamic load, someone moving the rig, adjusting the angle for a presentation, or significant vibration event, the bolt would fail. The rig would drop on the downstage side. 260 pounds of professional lighting equipment suspended at 15 feet directly above the speaker's position. Ryan sat on the lift platform for a long moment, looking at the bolt. He took photographs with his phone, detailed ones, with his hand in frame for scale, then close-up shots of the thread engagement, the tool markings on the bolt head where something had gripped it, the lack of corrosion on the exposed threads that confirmed the backing out was recent. Then he climbed down and looked at the event schedule board posted at the hall entrance. Sterling Technologies quarterly product launch event. Date: November 21st. Main stage presentation by CEO Olivia Sterling. 12 days away. He stood in the empty event hall for a full 60 seconds, looking at the stage. Then he called Marcus Chen directly, which he had never done before, and said, "I need you to come to the event hall on 25 right now. Don't send anyone else first. Come yourself." Marcus arrived 14 minutes later. Ryan showed him everything: the photographs on his phone, the bolt, the thread engagement, the event schedule. Marcus was quiet for a long time while he looked at the bracket assembly. When was this hall last inspected? Ryan asked. The previous technician logged it as complete about 6 weeks ago. Marcus's voice was controlled in the specific way that control is expensive. It wasn't complete. Or it was complete and then someone came back. Ryan pointed to the tool markings. Those are fresh, no oxidation, no dirt in the marks. That was recent. How recent? Within the last 2 weeks, maybe less. Marcus took his own photographs. He looked at the event schedule board. He looked at Ryan. You did the right thing calling me directly, he said. I want you to document everything you found, time-stamped, and send it to my personal email. Not the facilities system, my personal email. He paused. Then I want you to secure this rig for load-bearing safety and keep this conversation between us until I've made 2 phone calls. Is the event going to proceed? I don't know yet. Marcus looked at the stage. But if it does, this rig will be safe first. Ryan secured the bracket assembly, rethreaded the bolt to full engagement, tested the load with the lift's weight sensor, confirmed the structural integrity, while Marcus stood at the entrance making calls that Ryan couldn't hear. When he climbed down, Marcus came back in. Security and the board chair have been informed, Marcus said. This will be investigated. The camera gap, Ryan said. 6 weeks ago. The 4-minute blank in executive floor coverage. This is connected. Marcus looked at him steadily. What makes you say that? Because whoever did this needed access to the event hall after hours without being recorded doing something they shouldn't have been doing. And whoever is comfortable clearing building security records is comfortable with a longer plan than just a loose bolt. Marcus was quiet. You saved the security report. I filed it. You saved it personally. Ryan looked at him. I noticed it didn't have the right fingerprints for a system error, so yes. Marcus exhaled once, controlled. Send me everything you have. The camera log analysis, too. He paused at the door. And Ryan, don't tell Ms. Sterling yet. Not until I know more about what we're dealing with. Ryan nodded, but he didn't like it. He packed up his tools and drove to school pickup and said nothing to anyone. And he sat across from Emma at dinner that night and watched her eat pasta and explain a problem she'd been having with her best friend Lily over something about crayons. And he listened carefully and responded carefully and thought about the bolt and the stage and the event 12 days away and the way Olivia Sterling looked when she stepped up to a microphone and became something completely different from the tired, careful woman he saw in the corridors. He thought about 260 pounds of lighting equipment. He thought about the camera gap. He thought about the word plan. The investigation, whatever Marcus Chen was running, produced no visible results in the following week. The event hall was quietly locked for routine deep maintenance, a cover story that kept it off anyone's radar while security did whatever they were doing. Ryan received a brief message from Marcus. Proceeding. Stay available. Life on 32 continued in its surface pattern. Olivia ran her meetings, worked her impossible hours, managed the controlled pressure of running a public company with a board that she'd implied, without ever saying it clearly, was not entirely in her corner. Ryan noticed that the board meetings in late November had a different quality to the atmosphere afterward. The executive floor absorbed mood the way old buildings absorbed sound, imperfectly, with residue. After the November board session, Sandra was quieter than usual. 2 of the senior VPs spent an hour in a closed conference room that afternoon with the particular body language of people preparing for something unpleasant. And Olivia, who Ryan passed in the corridor at 5:45 p.m., while he was finishing a routine cable inspection, had the face of someone who had just spent 8 hours managing people who were looking for a way out from under her. He didn't say anything about it. He'd learned to recognize which silences she wanted filled and which ones she just needed witnessed. She was the one who spoke first. Do you know what the hardest part of running a company is? She asked, stopping a few feet away, arms crossed over her chest in that comfortable way. I'm guessing it's not the actual decisions. No, the decisions are the easy part. You gather information, you weigh options, you make the call. She looked down the corridor toward the city windows. The hard part is that everyone in that boardroom has a version of this company in their head that serves their specific interests. And every decision I make is either protecting their version or threatening it, and the ones who feel threatened. She stopped. Are patient, Ryan said. She looked at him. Patient people are the ones who plan, he said carefully, aware of the territory he was walking near. They don't react, they accumulate. And when they move, it's not obvious until it already has. She studied him. You're speaking from experience? Partly. He kept his face neutral, and partly from paying attention. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her deciding something. Someone on the board has been trying to build a case for a leadership review, she said. It's not public yet, but it's coming. They've been collecting information, some of it real, some of it I suspect is being shaped to look real, for months. Ryan looked at her steadily. Do you know who? I have strong suspicions. She uncrossed her arms. But strong suspicions aren't proof, and the people who move against CEOs understand that you need the full structure in place before you act. Evidence, allies, a replacement narrative. Her voice was even, analytical, the way she was when she was controlling the fear underneath. They're close. I can feel it. He wanted to tell her about the bolt, about the camera gap, about the fact that close might be an understatement. Marcus had asked him not to, and he'd respected that. But standing here watching her talk about powerful people trying to take something from her while she didn't know the full shape of what was aimed at her, it sat wrong. Olivia, he said, and her first name came out deliberately, testing whether it was allowed. She didn't correct him. Be careful about the product launch event, he said. She tilted her head slightly. The event is important. Canceling would be read as retreat. I'm not saying cancel. I'm saying be careful. Be specific about where you stand and who's around you and what the environment looks like before you're in it. She looked at him for a long moment with the measuring quality. Is there something you know that you're not telling me? I know what I told you, he said. Careful. She held his gaze for another beat and then nodded, once, accepting it without demanding more, which told him something about how much she'd come to trust him, that she could take be careful from him without needing the full file. Okay, she said. She straightened. Go home. In a minute. She almost smiled and went back to her office. He told Carla on Sunday that things were getting complicated. He didn't use the word dangerous because he was still working out which parts of what he knew he could share with anyone outside of Marcus Chen. He said complicated, and Carla heard the particular weight under it. Complicated work complicated or complicated feelings complicated? She asked. Both, he said. Carla was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? Yeah. Is Emma okay? She's fine. She's better at fractions. Ryan, her voice went careful. Does whatever this is put you in a position where things could go badly? He thought about the bolt, about the camera gap, about the clean, deliberate quality of what someone had arranged on that stage. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Okay, Carla exhaled. Keep me posted. I will. He hung up and sat in the kitchen for a while after Emma was in bed, going over the event hall photographs on his phone. Marcus had confirmed the bolt had been handled and secured, that the structural integrity of the entire rig had now been checked and certified by an external contractor. The stage was safe. He'd been told that. But the person who had put the bolt there was still in the building, was still coming to work every day, riding the same elevators, attending the same board meetings, was still, as far as Ryan could tell, operating on whatever timeline they'd set for themselves when they decided that the most efficient way to remove Olivia Sterling from leadership was to remove her from everything. He closed the photographs. He checked that the door was locked. He went to bed. 3 days before the product launch, Marcus Chen called him in for a private meeting in a small conference room on the 30th floor, 2 levels below executive, away from Sandra and the daily traffic of 32. We've identified the individual who accessed the event hall, Marcus said. He had a tablet in front of him but didn't look at it. I'm not going to give you a name for reasons that will become clear. What I will tell you is that this person is senior, has been with the company for 11 years, and has the kind of access that explains how the camera gap was engineered. Ryan sat across from him. Is Olivia... does she know? She's been briefed this morning, yes. Law enforcement is involved. The decision has been made to proceed with the launch event as scheduled, because alerting the responsible party that we know changes the legal landscape around what can be charged. He paused. The event will have additional security, that won't be visible to the room. The stage area will be continuously monitored from the moment the doors open. But she still goes on stage, Ryan said. Yes. And the person who modified the rig is going to be in the room. That's the operational assumption, yes. Ryan looked at the table. If something else was arranged, something the inspection didn't catch. We've done 3 full sweeps, Marcus said. The venue is clean. 3 sweeps by the same team that was available when the bolt was modified in the first place. Marcus met his eyes. He didn't argue. I want to be in the event hall, Ryan said, during the presentation. Not visible, but present. Marcus studied him. Your facilities. I know the hall. I did the inspection. If something goes wrong with any equipment in that space, I'm faster than anyone from your security team at understanding what's happening and where. A long pause. You'd be there in an observer capacity, Marcus said finally. Not enforcement. Understood. If something occurs, you stay out of it. Sure, Ryan said, in the voice he used when he was agreeing to a condition he might not be able to honor. Marcus looked at him for a moment like he understood exactly what that tone meant. Don't get yourself hurt, he said. That's not a legal statement. That's me telling you not to get yourself hurt. Copy that. The night before the event, Ryan found Olivia in her office at 8 p.m. He'd stayed late to check the AV system set up in the event hall. Legitimate work, logged and scheduled. And he came back up to 32 for his bag, and she was still there, standing at the window with her back to the door, looking out at the November city with its early dark and its lit windows stacked up into the sky. Hey, he said from the doorway. She turned. She was still in her work clothes, but she'd taken the blazer off, which he'd never seen before. She looked tired in a way that didn't make her look less like herself, just more directly like herself. You're here late, she said, checking the event hall setup. He held up his bag. Just heading out. She nodded, but she didn't turn back to the window, and he didn't walk away. And there was a moment of the specific silence that had become, over weeks, a recognizable thing between them. I know something happened with the stage rig, she said. Not a question. He kept his face quiet. Marcus briefed you. He told me the basic outline. She looked at him directly. He didn't tell me who found it. Ryan said nothing. Was it you? She asked. He met her eyes. Yeah. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he could hear the building settling around them, the small movements of the structure adjusting to temperature change, the sounds that old buildings make at night when they think nobody's listening. You knew something was wrong before Marcus did, she said. The camera gap. I flagged it as a potential anomaly. Security dismissed it. But you kept it. I thought it was worth keeping. She turned back to the window, but not in the way that meant the conversation was over, in the way that meant she was processing something that needed a minute. I've run this company for 4 years, she said. I have a chief security officer, a VP of operations, a legal team, a board of directors. I have people whose entire job is to manage risk. She paused. And the first person who understood that something was actually wrong was a man who works on the ceiling. Ryan almost said something mild and self-deprecating and stopped himself. She wasn't making a joke, and she didn't need him to soften it. I notice things, he said. It's what I do. She turned around. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before, something without the careful management layer, something that was just a person looking at another person and not calculating anything. Thank you, she said. Not for doing your job, for the other part. The part where you paid attention when you didn't have to. He didn't know what to do with gratitude delivered that plainly. He wasn't used to people making it that direct. The event's going to be fine, he said. The rig is secure. The venue's been swept. Marcus's team will be there. Will you be there? A beat. Yes, he said. She nodded once, and something in her shoulders dropped slightly. The smallest release of something she'd been carrying. It was barely visible. He saw it anyway. Go home to Emma, she said. She's at my sister's tonight. Then go home and sleep. You've been here since 7 this morning. He picked up his bag. He was almost to the door when she said quietly, Ryan. He stopped. I'm aware of what this is. She said it carefully, precisely. the way she said all things she meant seriously. And I don't know what to do with it any more than you do. But I wanted you to know that I'm aware. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Yeah, he said. Me too. He walked out. He rode the elevator down. He drove home through the November dark, the city lights sliding across his windshield, and he sat in the parking lot outside his apartment for 5 minutes before going inside. She was aware. He was aware. And tomorrow, someone who had planned carefully and patiently for months was going to be in the same room with her, and Ryan Walker, facilities technician, was going to be watching from the wings because 4 years of holding his own life together with competence and quiet had apparently led him here, to this specific building, this specific floor, this specific woman, and a danger that was more real than any of them had entirely let themselves say out loud. He went inside. He set his alarm. He did not sleep well. End of part 2. He arrived at the building at 6 in the morning on the day of the launch event, 2 hours before the first attendees were scheduled and 3 hours before Olivia would take the stage. The November sky outside was the particular shade of gray that suggested it had considered snowing and decided against it. Ryan had his tool bag and his access badge and a cup of coffee from the cart on the corner that he'd been stopping at every morning for 4 months. The man who ran the cart was named Phil, and Phil never asked Ryan how he was doing because Phil understood that at 6 in the morning, most people didn't want to perform an answer to that question. Ryan appreciated that about Phil. He went through the service entrance, took the service elevator to 25, and spent 40 minutes doing a final walk of the event hall before anyone else arrived. He checked every piece of rigging hardware himself, not because he didn't trust the 3 previous sweeps, but because the previous sweeps were what they were, and he was who he was, and there was a difference between trusting a system and personally verifying a system, and today was not a day to rely on the former. Everything he could physically access was secure. The primary center rig, the one with the repaired bolt, held its load cleanly. The secondary perimeter lights were locked at their adjusted positions. The audio system he'd calibrated 3 days before was reading correctly on the panel by the stage. The seats in the event hall were arranged in a shallow arc around the stage, room for about 250 people, the kind of configuration that gave a good sight line from almost anywhere. He noted the sight lines. He noted the exits. He noted the wings on either side of the stage, where cables and control panels were tucked behind low partitions and where a person who was not visible to the room could stand and see most of it. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. He was a technician. But he was doing it anyway, and he didn't waste energy feeling complicated about the fact. By 8 o'clock, the event team had arrived and the hall was moving. Technicians from the AV company making final adjustments, Sterling's event coordinator barking instructions about table placement and signage, 2 members of Marcus's expanded security detail moving through the room with the unhurried deliberateness of people who were cataloging everything. One of them, a compact woman with short hair named Torres, found Ryan near the stage left wing at 8:20 and looked at him without expression. "You're Walker," she said. "Marcus told me you'd be here." "That's right. You know the equipment." "I know all of it." She looked at the hall, then back at him. "If you see something that looks wrong, structurally, mechanically, anything in the room's systems, you tell me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." "Understood." "I mean that," she said. "Don't be a hero." "I'm the person who finds the problem," Ryan said. "You're the person who handles what's causing it. That's a workable division." Torres looked at him for a moment. "Good answer," she said, and moved on. Olivia arrived at 9:15. He saw her from across the hall as she came in with Sandra and a junior communications staffer who was holding a tablet and speaking quickly about last-minute program changes. She was in the event presentation version of herself, a navy blazer, measured and precise. The kind of outfit that read as authoritative without trying to announce it. Her hair was back. Her expression was composed. She saw him across the room. He gave a single nod. She gave one back, and then the communications staffer recaptured her attention with something that required an immediate decision, and she walked with them toward the stage for a sound check without looking at him again. He watched her walk. He watched the way she moved through the room, greeting people efficiently, adjusting the microphone height on the podium herself rather than waiting for someone to do it, reviewing the slide deck display with the focused attention of someone going through a pre-flight checklist. There was no visible trace of what she'd said to him last night, or of what she knew about the bolt, or of the investigation running below the surface of all of this. She had sealed it completely, professionally, in a way that could have been admirable or sad depending on how you looked at it. Ryan thought it was both. He positioned himself in the stage left wing behind a low partition where he had an unobstructed view of the stage and about 2/3 of the seated area. Torres had a corresponding position on stage right. 2 other members of security were in the rear of the hall and near the main entrance. It was, as Marcus had promised, invisible. To anyone looking at the event, it was a product launch. To the people who knew what they were looking for, it was a controlled environment waiting to see whether the danger had already passed or was still in motion. Ryan had his phone in his left hand with Torres's number open. His tool bag was on the floor beside him, which was habit because Ryan Walker did not go anywhere in this building without his tool bag. The doors opened at 9:45 for the guests. A mix of investors, journalists, key clients, and selected senior employees. Ryan watched them file in, 170 people over 20 minutes, and he watched who was present, the way he'd watched the camera log and the rig hardware and the bolt threading, looking for the thing that didn't belong in the pattern. He recognized most of the senior staff. Marcus had given him a briefing sheet the previous day. Not a full investigative dossier, just enough context to understand the landscape. The board members who were present. The senior VPs. The ones who were, as Marcus had carefully phrased it, of interest to the current investigation. He found the person Marcus had been describing, without ever naming, through the process of elimination and pattern recognition. His name was David Reeves, Executive Vice President of Corporate Development. 53 years old, 11-year tenure. The kind of institutional presence that accumulated influence through longevity and relationship management rather than any single visible achievement. He arrived with 2 board-aligned directors whom Ryan recognized from the briefing, took seats in the second row, and almost immediately began working his phone with the contained activity of someone managing logistics. Ryan watched him. Reeves was calm, too calm in the specific way of someone who knows how the next hour is going to go. Not the relaxed calm of someone present for a normal corporate event, but the settled calm of someone whose preparations were complete and whose role now was to wait. Ryan filed that observation. He kept watching. The event started at 10:05, 5 minutes behind schedule. The communications staffer who'd been tracking Olivia all morning came on first to introduce the program. Then a VP from product development walked through the technical specs of the new software platform being launched. Then there was a brief video segment that the room watched on the large screen at the back of the stage. Ryan didn't watch the screen. He watched Reeves. He watched the exits. He watched the rigging above the stage with the automatic attention of someone who had spent 2 hours checking it this morning and would spend the rest of the event making sure it stayed what he'd confirmed it to be. The center rig was holding. The lights were tracking correctly. Everything above the stage was exactly where he'd put it. Olivia came on at 10:31. The applause when she walked out was the kind that contained several different feelings at once. Genuine enthusiasm from the people who were invested in the company's success, the polite kind from the people who were there because they needed to be, and from somewhere in the second row, a silence that was too studied to be accidental. Ryan noticed Reeves's hands in his lap during the applause. Still, not clapping. She spoke well. Clearly, specifically, without the kind of filler language that ambitious presentations sometimes accumulated. She talked about what the new platform did and why it mattered, and she talked about it in the specific terms of someone who had spent months in the details rather than having the details summarized for her. Ryan had known, from working near her for months, that she was good at this. But watching her in front of a room was different from knowing it secondhand. She had a quality when she was publicly certain about something that made the room lean slightly forward, a quality of compression that suggested her words had been edited severely and that what remained was exactly what needed to be there. He was watching her when he saw the thing that was wrong. It wasn't the rigging. The rigging was fine. It was the cable tray on the stage left side, the aluminum channel that ran along the floor behind the presentation podium, carrying the power feeds for the stage lighting control panel. a panel that was currently live, supplying power to the 240 watts of active stage lighting above the speaker's position. The cover on the cable tray had been partially displaced. From his position in the wing, Ryan could see that approximately 18 inches of the cable tray was now open, exposed conductors within 2 feet of the area where Olivia was standing and moving as she presented. It might have been accidental. Someone from the AV setup team might have bumped it during the morning preparations and not noticed. It might not have been accidental. Ryan looked at the cables. He looked at the distance from the podium to the exposed section. Olivia was currently centered at the podium. If she moved naturally to the right, toward the presentation screen, which presenters often did to gesture at their slides, she would step directly over the open section. He texted Torres, "Cable tray cover displaced stage left. Open conductors 2 feet from speaker position. Maybe nothing. Watch the left." Torres's reply came in 4 seconds. Confirmed. Hold. He watched. Olivia moved to the right as she gestured toward the slide display. Her right foot cleared the exposed section by about 8 inches. Ryan breathed. He looked at the cable tray again, looked at the wall panel that controlled the cable tray's power feed, looked at the room. Reeves had leaned slightly forward in his second-row seat. His phone was in his hand at a specific angle that Ryan recognized, after a moment, as the angle of someone reading a notification rather than sending one. The slide on the screen behind Olivia changed. She moved back toward center. Ryan was still watching Reeves when Reeves's right thumb moved on his phone screen. The cable tray cover shifted. It moved on its own. Specifically, the remaining secured section of the cover popped loose, and the full 18-inch section of exposed conductor was now open, and Olivia was stepping toward the right again because the new slide was a product demonstration that drew every speaker naturally away from center. Ryan was already moving. He was out of the wing and on the stage in 3 steps, which was fast enough to startle the front row and generate a collective intake of breath from the room. He didn't yell. He didn't announce himself. He crossed the stage in what felt like a single motion and got between Olivia and the cable tray section and got his arm around her shoulders and moved her backward and left in the same action. And her heel caught the edge of the podium, and they both went sideways and down, Ryan taking the impact on his left shoulder against the stage deck, Olivia landing partially on him. The main center stage lighting rig did not fall. The cable tray sparked once, a brief, sharp sound and a small blue-white flash, as something in the live conductor assembly shorted against the aluminum tray body. The stage went dark for approximately 2 seconds before the backup power kicked in and the house lights came up. The room erupted. Not screaming, confusion, the scraping of chairs, voices overlapping, security moving immediately from the positions they'd been holding for 90 minutes. Torres was on stage in seconds, putting herself between Olivia and the room, speaking into her earpiece. The 2 rear-of-house security staff were already moving through the crowd toward the second row. Ryan was sitting up on the stage deck, left shoulder aching where he'd taken the landing, trying to determine whether anything was actually wrong with him beyond the bruise that was already forming. Olivia was beside him, her hand on the floor, looking at him with the expression of someone whose internal processing was running about 10 seconds behind the physical reality. "Are you hurt?" he said. She stared at him for a moment. "Olivia, are you hurt?" "No." She looked at her hands, then at him. "Are you?" "My shoulder. It's fine." It was not entirely fine, but it was the kind of not fine that was manageable and not the current priority. Torres's voice above them. "Both of you, on your feet, stage left, now." They got up. Ryan's left arm didn't fully cooperate on the first attempt, and Olivia, without comment, put her hand under his right arm and helped him stand, which was one of those moments where the role reversal was complete enough that he filed it away for later. They moved together into the stage left wing, the same partition he'd been standing behind for the last hour, while Torres and the security team managed the room. Through the gap in the partition, Ryan watched Reeves. He was already out of his chair. One of the security staff, a large man in a gray suit who'd been standing at the rear wall, had a hand on Reeves's upper arm. Reeves was speaking quickly. The board director to his right had gone completely still with the specific immobility of someone calculating their exposure. It was over. Or the visible part was over. The next hour happened in pieces. Security cleared the event hall. Law enforcement, who had apparently been staged in a vehicle in the building's parking structure as part of the operation Marcus had been running, arrived within 8 minutes. The guests were guided to a secondary space on 24, where they were given the official word that the event had been paused due to a technical issue. 3 of them left immediately, men in good suits who had somewhere else to be, which Torres noted with the contained attention of someone adding names to a list. Reeves was taken to a conference room on 30, not yet under arrest, but under the specific detention that precedes it when law enforcement is present and the evidence is already assembled. The board director who'd been sitting beside him was spoken to separately by 2 other officers in a second room. Ryan sat in the stage left wing with an ice pack from the building's first aid kit pressed against his left shoulder, talking to a detective named Hargrove, who had the particular patient energy of someone accustomed to interviewing people whose adrenaline was still elevated. "Walk me through what you observed," Hargrove said. "From the beginning of the event." Ryan walked him through it. The cable tray cover, the displacement, the text to Torres, Reeves's phone angle, the thumb movement, the secondary displacement of the cover. He was specific and sequential and didn't editorialize, because editorialize required a certainty he didn't technically have, and the facts were damning enough without it. Hargrove made notes. "The cable tray cover. You said it moved after Reeves's thumb movement on the phone screen." "That's what I observed." "Are you saying he triggered it remotely?" "I'm saying the cover moved approximately 2 seconds after his thumb moved on his phone screen, and that the cover would not have moved on its own given the way it was partially secured." Ryan shifted the ice pack. "What he triggered and how—" "I don't have the technical specifics of the mechanism." "That's your job." Hargrove nodded. "Fair enough." He looked at his notes. "And the primary rig? You were watching for a potential failure there." "Based on what I found during inspection, yes. That's what the investigation focused on. The cable tray was a secondary setup, something I don't think anyone swept for specifically because it was the kind of system that could be configured remotely after a sweep." Hargrove looked at him. "You figured that out on the fly?" "I figured it out when I saw the cover move," Ryan said. "Anyone could have." "They didn't, though." Hargrove closed the notebook. "We'll need a full statement." "I know." Hargrove left. Marcus appeared almost immediately after, as if he'd been waiting outside the wing. "How's the shoulder?" "I'll live." Marcus sat down across from him. He looked tired in the way that people look tired when something they've been managing for weeks finally breaks into the open and the relief is inseparable from the damage. "Reeves has been planning this for about 8 months, Marcus said. "We think the original plan involved the rig failure. Straightforward, tragic, attributed to equipment maintenance failure. When the rig was discovered and secured, he pivoted. The cable tray modification was secondary infrastructure he'd put in place earlier as a backup. Remote trigger, modified electromagnetic actuator on the tray's secondary retention clip." Ryan absorbed that. "So when the rig was found, he knew the primary plan was burned. We think he knew someone had found it, even if he didn't know exactly who. The camera gap from 6 weeks ago was him accessing the server room to review the maintenance logs, trying to determine if anyone had documented the rig modification. And when I flagged the anomaly, he saw the flag in the system and concluded someone was close. He accelerated the timeline." Marcus paused. "Which meant using the backup today instead of waiting." Ryan thought about the clean gap in the camera log, about the 4 minutes and 17 seconds that had looked like a system error. "He was thorough," Ryan said. "He was." Marcus looked at the floor. He'd also been building an evidentiary case against Olivia, manufactured financial discrepancies, cherry-picked communications to suggest she'd been making self-dealing decisions. The plan was apparently for the physical elimination to look like a tragic accident, followed by the revelation of the financial misconduct, which would allow the board faction he'd assembled to appoint an interim CEO from within that group. "Full replacement," Ryan said. "Complete. Company, leadership, direction." Marcus exhaled. He'd been at it for the better part of a year. Ryan sat with that for a moment. The scale of it, the patience of it. 8 months of constructed planning, the way he'd told Olivia, patient people are the ones who plan. And here was what patient planning looked like when the motivation was serious enough. "Is she okay?" he asked. "She's talking to law enforcement right now. She's—" Marcus paused, choosing his word carefully. She's operational. Ryan almost laughed at that. Operational, yeah. Boss said. He saw her at 2 in the afternoon in one of the 32nd floor conference rooms where she'd retreated after the law enforcement interviews to deal with the communications fallout. Because there was a communications fallout, obviously, 200 people had seen their CEO knocked sideways on a stage by a maintenance technician, and the event hall had gone dark, and whatever Sterling Technologies PR team was managing right now was probably a specific kind of nightmare. She was on a call when he appeared in the doorway. She saw him and held up one finger. A minute, and he waited in the hallway, ice pack still in his left hand, shoulder that was definitely going to be spectacularly bruised by tomorrow. She ended the call, and he came in and stood across the conference table from her. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. She had a quality right now that he hadn't seen from her before. Not the composed public face, not the late-night window-staring version, but something raw-edged and direct, like the outer layer had been stripped by the morning and she hadn't rebuilt it yet. "How's your shoulder?" she said. "Going to be a problem by tomorrow. Fine for now?" She nodded. "I've been told you identified the cable tray issue during the event." "I saw Reeves's phone." "Marcus said you were watching Reeves specifically." "I watched everyone specifically. Reeves was the one who wasn't clapping." She looked at him. "That's what you noticed? That he wasn't clapping?" "And the way he was sitting, and his phone angle, and the fact that he arrived with 2 people from the board group Marcus had flagged." He set the ice pack on the table. "I didn't know his name at that point. I knew the pattern." She was quiet for a moment. "When I fell," she said, "my first thought was that something had gone wrong with the rig, that the secondary anchor had failed, something structural." She paused. "It took me several seconds to understand that someone had moved me away from something rather than being knocked into me by something falling." "The floor of the stage is hard," he said. "I apologize for that." "Don't." Her voice was flat and direct. "Don't apologize for that." He looked at her. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "This morning, you were in that hall at 6 a.m. You spent the whole event in the wing. You watched the room instead of the presentation." She paused. "I know Marcus asked you not to tell me about the rig investigation. Did you position yourself in that hall this morning because Marcus asked you to?" Ryan was quiet for a beat. "He asked me to be available," Ryan said. "I chose where available meant." She absorbed that. "So no one told you to do that specifically?" "No." "Why?" she asked. Simply, directly. He thought about the honest answer. "Because I trust the systems, and I also know their limits, and because—" He stopped, and then made the decision to say the actual thing instead of the safe version of it. "Because if something went wrong in that room, I wanted to be the one who noticed it." She looked at him across the conference table. The afternoon light came in through the windows behind her, the November gray doing its flat, even work on the room. "That's a personal answer," she said. "Yes." She didn't look away. "I'm aware of that." He thought about last night, in her office. "I'm aware of what this is. And I don't know what to do with it any more than you do." Standing in that conference room with the events of the morning between them. The stage, the fall, the bruise forming in his left shoulder. It felt like the polite distance they'd been maintaining by mutual agreement had been used up. Not dramatically, not with a speech, just used up. Like the kind of avoidance that works until it doesn't, until something happens that makes the avoidance take more energy than the honesty. "Are you going to be okay today?" he asked. "After all of this?" "No," she said, which surprised him. She usually didn't answer that question honestly. "Not today. I'll be okay by tomorrow." She paused. "I've been running this company for 4 years with the knowledge that someone inside it was waiting for me to fail. Knowing that one of them was willing to wait 8 months to arrange something like what Reeves arranged." She stopped. "That's not information you absorb in an afternoon." "No," he said. "And I keep thinking about my father, about whether he knew, whether he left me something he understood was hostile and didn't tell me how hostile it was." She crossed her arms over her chest. "Not the comfortable way, the protective way. That's the part I don't know how to process yet." Ryan didn't offer anything in response to that. He just let it be true without trying to make it smaller or more manageable. After a moment, she said quietly, "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Just sit with someone else's hard thing without trying to fix it." He thought about Emma, about the patience she'd learned too young, about the way he'd had to learn which problems yielded to the fix and which ones just needed someone to stand next to them while they ran their course. "I work on buildings," he said. "Some things need a part replaced. Some things need time and the right conditions, and eventually they stabilize on their own. The job is knowing which is which." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a very unusual person, Ryan Walker." "So I've been told." The ghost of the almost smile, there and gone. "Go get your shoulder looked at," she said. "Properly, not just an ice pack." "I will." "Sandra has the name of the company's medical provider. Tell her I said to get you an appointment today." You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said, with a sharpness that was the good kind, the kind that meant she was tired of him minimizing. "Go." He went to find Sandra. He thought about the morning and about the fact that a year ago he had been a floor technician in this building who ate lunch in the break room and picked up his daughter at 3:15 and understood, in the abstract way of people who have made a kind of peace with their situation, that his life was good and also small. He didn't know yet exactly what it was becoming. He just knew it was something different. Oh, Emma was at Carla's for 2 nights because of the scheduling. Ryan had arranged it in advance for the event week, not knowing how the days would unfold. He drove to Carla's after the shoulder appointment, which confirmed a mild AC joint sprain that required rest, anti-inflammatory medication, and what the doctor had described with professional understatement as avoiding impacts for 4 to 6 weeks. He walked into Carla's kitchen, and Emma looked up from the table where she was doing homework and said, "Daddy, why is your arm in a sling?" "I had a small accident at work." Emma looked at the sling with the careful assessment of a 6-year-old deciding how worried to be. "Does it hurt?" "A little bit." "A little bit like stepping on a Lego? Or a little bit like when I fell off the jungle gym?" He sat down across from her. "Somewhere between those two." She accepted this calibration and went back to her homework. Carla appeared from the adjacent room with the expression of someone who had watched the news in the last 2 hours. "The Sterling Technologies thing." "Yeah." "Ryan?" "I'm fine. Sprained shoulder." Carla looked at him with the combination of relief and exasperation that had been her dominant mode of looking at him since they were children. She sat down at the table. "Tell me." He told her. Not all of it, but enough. The investigation, the event, the cable tray, what he'd done and why. Carla was quiet for a while after he finished. Emma had moved to the floor with her homework book, doing that thing she did where she positioned herself in the physical space of a conversation without participating in it. "She's okay?" Carla asked finally. Meaning Olivia. "She's okay." "And you?" "I told you, sprained shoulder." "I'm not talking about the shoulder." Carla looked at him steadily. "You put yourself between her and something that could have been seriously bad. That's not the work of someone who's keeping appropriate professional distance." Ryan looked at his daughter on the floor. Emma turned a page. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." Carla nodded once. She wasn't surprised. She'd been not surprised about this for a while. "You said she's aware of it," Carla said. "She said she was." "And?" He was quiet. "And I don't know what that means practically. She runs a publicly traded company. I'm on the maintenance team." He paused. "We come from pretty different places." "You also just saved her life." "Maybe. Maybe the cable would have been a minor shock and a bad day rather than—" "Ryan." Carla's voice was gentle but firm. "Stop giving the minimum version," Emma said from the floor without looking up. "Daddy, what does appropriate professional distance mean?" Ryan looked at his sister. Carla pressed her lips together, hiding something. "It means," Ryan said carefully, "keeping work things at work." Emma considered this with the focused gravity she gave everything. "Is that hard?" "Sometimes," Ryan said. Emma nodded solemnly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected about the adult world, and went back to her homework. Carla waited until Emma had gone to brush her teeth before she said quietly, She asked me today what your work is like. Emma did. I told her you fix things so the people who work in big buildings are safe. She paused. She said, I know, he's good at that. Just like that. No drama, no elaboration, just completely certain. Ryan sat with that in the kitchen of his sister's house, his arm in a sling, the day settling into its quiet, exhausted aftermath. She's a good kid, he said. She is, Carla said. She learned it from somewhere. He didn't go back to the building for 2 days on medical instruction. On the third day, Dale called to confirm his modified duty assignment. Light work only, no lifts, no overhead work. And Ryan went in and spent most of the day doing software-side maintenance work that he could manage one-handed. The 32nd floor was different in the days after the event. Not chaotic. Sterling Technologies had a communications team, and a legal team, and a crisis protocol, and all of them were running, but differently weighted, like the air had been rearranged. The board meeting that had been scheduled for the following week was moved and restructured. 2 senior VPs who had been loosely associated with Reeves's faction had resigned in the intervening days with the specific speed of people getting ahead of something. The building itself continued its rhythms, but there was a new quality to the quiet up here. He ran into Olivia on his second day back, in the corridor near the service room late in the afternoon. She looked at his arm. Sling was gone by then, but he was favoring it, and said, How is it? Better. Another week or 2. She nodded. She had the post-crisis version of herself. Still pressed, still precise, but slightly less armored than usual, as if the armor had been sent out for repairs along with everything else. Ryan, I want to... She stopped. Started again. I've been trying to figure out what to say for 2 days. I'm not doing very well at it. You don't have to say anything. I want to. She crossed her arms, not defensively, thinking. What you did isn't... I can't file it under standard professional categories and move on. That would be dishonest. Agreed. And I'm aware that there are layers to what's between us that are complicated by context, by the company, by what I do and what you do. Also agreed. Well, I don't have a resolution to those complications, she said. I want to be clear about that. I don't have a speech that makes this simple. I'm not asking for simple, he said. She looked at him directly. What are you asking for? He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about things that deserved honesty. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I didn't do what I did because I wanted something. I did it because... He stopped and managed it anyway. Because I care about what happens to you. That's the whole thing. I don't have a complicated version of it. She was quiet for a long moment. The building settled around them, the small sounds of its systems doing their perpetual work. I'm bad at this, she said finally. Not at the company, not at the decisions, at this kind of thing, being a person to another person. I've been the CEO so long that the other parts are... She searched for the word. Rusty. That's okay. It might be inconvenient, she said, with a dryness that was close to something warmer. I work with inconvenient systems, he said. I'm patient. She looked at him for a moment, and the thing that had been almost a smile for months was now clearly a smile, small and unguarded and real, and it was directed at him without any management layer between it and its arrival. I know you are, she said. She went back to her office. Ryan stood in the corridor for a moment, shoulder aching, feeling like something that had been improperly grounded for a very long time had been correctly rewired. Not fixed, not finished, but set on the right path for what came next. He went to do his last check of the day. He documented his work orders. He picked up his bag at 3:45 and drove to Carla's to get Emma. How was work? Emma asked from the back seat, with the careful attention of someone who understood that the answer might actually be interesting today. Better, Ryan said. Definitely better. Emma nodded seriously, looking out the window at the city going by. Good, she said. The formal charges against David Reeves were filed on a Monday morning, 12 days after the product launch event. Ryan heard about it the way he heard about most things on 32. Not through official announcement, but through the texture of the floor itself. The way Sandra moved through the morning with a contained energy that meant something significant had resolved. The way Marcus Chen walked past the service corridor at 8:15 with the specific gait of a man who had spent weeks carrying something heavy and had just been allowed to set it down. He found the news summary on his phone during his first break, sitting in the building's employee break room on 28 with a coffee he was already on his third attempt to drink, at a temperature that was still technically hot. Reeves had been charged with criminal conspiracy, attempted murder, securities fraud, and corporate espionage. The board director who'd been sitting beside him at the event, a man named Gerald Farrow, 22 years on the Sterling board, had been charged separately with conspiracy and securities violations. Two additional individuals, external contractors who had provided the technical components for both the rig modification and the cable tray actuator, had been identified and were expected to face charges in the following weeks. The manufactured financial discrepancies, the evidence Reeves had been building to make Olivia look like she'd been misusing company resources, had been handed over to forensic accountants who would apparently spend several months disentangling what was real from what had been constructed. Marcus had told Ryan, in a brief conversation the previous week, that the preliminary assessment suggested the fabrication was sophisticated but not airtight, the kind of work that holds up until someone who knows what they're looking for actually looks. Ryan read through this news summary. He put his phone in his pocket. He drank his coffee, which had finally arrived at a reasonable temperature. He thought about 8 months of careful, patient work by someone who had decided that removing a person was a more efficient solution than competing with her. And he thought about the 4-minute camera gap that had started all of it, the small anomaly in a log that most people would have attributed to a glitch and filed away. He thought about the word careful, which he'd been turning over for weeks now, and how it meant different things depending on who was holding it. Reeves had been careful in the way of someone building a trap. Ryan had been careful in the way of someone watching for one. The word was the same. The difference was everything. He went back to work. Why, December arrived, and with it the particular quality of winter in the building, the heating systems working harder, the windows showing frost at their edges in the early mornings, the shorter days creating a quality of interior light in the late afternoons that made the 32nd floor feel more enclosed, more separate from the city below. Ryan had always noticed how buildings changed with the seasons, not obviously, not in ways that most occupants registered, but in the small adjustments of systems and materials responding to temperature and humidity and the mechanical demands of keeping a large structure at a stable, human-comfortable interior climate. He noticed other changes too. The 32nd floor had a different quality in December than it had in November, and the difference wasn't only about Reeves's absence or the restructured board or the ongoing legal proceedings that were generating daily documentation requests for the company's legal team. Something in the overall atmosphere of the floor had settled, like a room after a storm. Not calm exactly, but oriented, moving in a known direction again. Olivia was working the same impossible hours. That hadn't changed. But the nature of what she was doing with those hours felt different, less defensive, more deliberate. She was building something rather than protecting something, and the distinction showed in how she moved through her days. She stopped by his work cart more often than she had before. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone watching would have cataloged as significant, because it still looked, from the outside, like a CEO who occasionally spoke to a member of her facilities team. But Ryan understood the distinction between professional exchange and the thing they were actually doing, which was making space for each other in the regular rhythms of a day, and both of them understood it without requiring it to be said. She had started asking about Emma with the genuine specific interest of someone who was paying attention across conversations rather than performing polite curiosity. Not how's your daughter, but actual follow-up. Did Emma figure out the fractions situation? And did she and Lily resolve the crayon disagreement? Small things that only mattered because they were remembered. Ryan noticed. He filed it next to the other things he was accumulating about Olivia Sterling. The way she laughed, which was rare and slightly reluctant, like she was always mildly surprised that something had gotten through her defenses enough to produce it. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands when she was thinking, just standing somewhere with the cup, not drinking, just holding the warm weight of it. The way she asked questions that landed slightly differently from the questions most people asked. They were specific, personal, attending to something she'd actually noticed rather than to the general shape of a topic. He was in deep. He knew it. He wasn't doing anything about it because the situation didn't have a clean available action, but he was not pretending to himself that it was anything less than what it was. The conversation that shifted things happened on a Wednesday in the second week of December at 4:40 in the afternoon when Ryan was wrapping up a sensor replacement on the floor's environmental monitoring system, and Olivia appeared from her office with her coat already on, which was unusual. She almost never left before 6. "You're leaving," he said. "I have something." She paused by his cart. She had an expression he'd learned to recognize as the one that preceded her saying something she'd been working up to for a while. "My father is in the hospital. Nothing acute. He had a procedure this morning that went well, but he wanted company this afternoon." Ryan straightened up from the equipment panel. "I'm sorry. Is he okay?" "He's stable. It's a chronic condition. He's been managing it for a few years." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I haven't seen him as much as I should have. The last year has been—" She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. "He built the company," Ryan said. Not a question, just marking the weight of it, and gave it to me when he was too sick to run it himself. She looked out the corridor window. "I think I've been angry at him for that, which is not a feeling I've spent a lot of time acknowledging." Ryan didn't fill the space with reassurance. "He knew the board had problems," she said. "He knew Farrow was self-interested and that Reeves was ambitious in the wrong direction. He told me when he handed over leadership that I needed to watch both of them." She paused. "He didn't tell me how serious it was. I think he thought I could manage it the same way he always managed it, by being smarter and working harder than everyone else." "Maybe that's how he did manage it," Ryan said. "Maybe." She looked at him. "Or maybe he knew it had gotten past managing and he was tired and I was the next option. And the version I live with now is the one where I'm never entirely sure which it was." There it was again. The things she didn't say to other people, the things she unpacked here, in the space of a corridor conversation, because something about the space between them had become where the unprocessed things went. "Does it matter?" Ryan asked quietly. "Which version it is?" She considered that. "To the outcome, no. The company is the same either way. The legal situation is the same." She pulled her coat closer. "To me, yes. Because it's the difference between being set up to fail and being trusted to handle something hard. Couldn't it be both?" She looked at him. "Couldn't he have trusted you completely and also not wanted to burden you with the full weight of what you were walking into?" "Both things," Ryan said. "Not one or the other." She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he wondered if he'd overstepped. "You're very good at that," she said finally. "What?" "Finding the version that isn't either extreme." She shifted her bag. "I usually only find the poles, the optimistic interpretation or the worst one. The middle ones are usually more accurate." "Usually," she agreed. She looked at him with the unguarded quality that showed up more frequently now, the thing that happened when she was operating below her public-facing layer. "I'll be out tomorrow morning, possibly into the afternoon." "I hope it goes well," he said. "With your father." "Thank you." She paused at the elevator, one hand on the call button. "Ryan, what you said about both things being true. I'm going to think about that on the drive over." "Good," he said. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. The doors closed. Ryan finished the sensor replacement, packed his cart, and went to collect Emma from Carla's. She'd stayed an extra night while Ryan's schedule had been unpredictable. And on the drive home, Emma asked him why he was quiet, and he said he was thinking. And she said about what? And he said about how two opposite things can both be true. And she said, after a moment of consideration, like how fractions are hard but also make sense once you get them. And he said yes, pretty much exactly like that. That's the second time Reeves made a move against Olivia happened in a way that nobody had anticipated, because the first move had been physical and patient and constructed over months, and this one was immediate and desperate and came from a person who had nothing left to lose. It was a Thursday morning, 1 week before Christmas. Reeves had been released on bail, substantial bail, with conditions, but release pending trial in the way that people with money and lawyers are released while the system processes itself. Ryan had known this because Marcus had told him, and Marcus had told him because both of them shared the opinion that knowing where Reeves was physically was relevant information given everything. Ryan was on 32 doing a routine check of the building management system terminals when his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't pick it up. He picked it up. Mr. Walker. A voice he didn't recognize, male, controlled, with the specific tone of someone reading from a prepared statement. You should be aware that David Reeves is in the building's parking structure as of 12 minutes ago. He has not signed in at security. He used a legacy access card that had not yet been deactivated. The call ended. Ryan stared at his phone for approximately 2 seconds. Then he moved. He called Torres first. Torres, who was now a regular security presence in the building as part of the ongoing investigation, and whose number was still in his phone from the event in November. Torres picked up on the second ring, and Ryan gave her the information in 8 words, and she said, lobby and parking structure. Now, and that was the end of that call. He called Marcus. Marcus's line went to voicemail, which meant he was on another call. Ryan left a message with the same 8 words and location and kept moving. The question was Olivia. She was on 32. He'd seen her 20 minutes ago at her desk, visible through the open office door as he'd passed with his tool cart. She was still here. Reeves knew the building, and he knew her schedule, and he had, as Marcus had explained in the post-event debrief, spent 8 months acquiring exactly the kind of operational knowledge about this building that would tell him where she was likely to be on a Thursday morning. Ryan went to her office. He pushed the door without knocking, which he had never done before. She looked up from her desk with an expression that shifted from surprise to attention when she read his face. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. "Reeves is in the building. Security is responding. I need you to move to the internal conference room, the one without exterior windows, and stay there until Torres clears the floor." She was already standing. "How did he get in?" "Old access card. Moving, please." She moved. He was aware, as they walked quickly down the corridor to the windowless internal conference room that served as a backup meeting space, that she wasn't asking him to slow down or explain more or verify the information through additional channels. She was moving because he'd said to move, which represented a specific kind of trust that he didn't take lightly. He got her into the room, checked that the interior lock worked, and pulled the door closed behind him as he stepped back into the corridor. He called Torres again. "She's in the internal conference room on 32, room 212, he said. "I'm on the floor." "We have visual on Reeves in the parking structure," Torres said. "He's moving toward the building entrance, 2 units responding. Stay on the floor, don't engage him directly." "Copy." He stood in the corridor and thought about what he knew, and what Reeves knew, and what the building's geography meant for someone moving from the parking structure toward the 32nd floor. The main elevators required a key card for executive floor access. The service elevators did not. They were controlled by a separate system that used a lower security badge, one that a legacy executive card might or might not have access to, depending on which system it predated. He went to the service elevator and checked the access log terminal. A card had been swiped at the service elevator ground floor call panel 4 minutes ago. The card number was in the log. He called Torres. "He's in the service elevator coming up." "Which elevator bank?" "North side." "I don't know what floor," he called. "Stay clear," Torres said, with the firmness of someone who understood that she was talking to a person who had a specific history of not staying clear when things got concrete. "I hear you," Ryan said. He stood in the service corridor and thought about the service elevator doors on 32, which were 12 feet from where he was standing, and thought about the instructions he'd been given and the distance between instructions and what was actually about to happen. The elevator light indicated an ascending car, moving up through the building, passing 28, passing 30, passing 31. It stopped at 32. The doors opened. Reeves stepped out. He was not what Ryan had expected, which was foolish. Ryan had seen him across a room at a corporate event and registered powerful, contained, controlled. What stood in the service corridor now was the underside of all of that. A man who had spent 8 months building something and watched it come apart and come apart and come apart again, and who had apparently concluded that if the thing he'd built was going to fall, it was going to fall in a way he controlled, which was the specific logic of someone who had run out of rational options. He was wearing a dark coat. His face was tightly composed. He had the look of someone who had made a decision that morning and was executing it before he could reconsider. He saw Ryan. He stopped. "Where is she?" Reeves said. "Not here," Ryan said. "You're the technician." His voice was careful, measuring. "The one at the launch." "Yeah." Reeves looked at the corridor, then back at Ryan. He was calculating. Ryan could see it. The assessment of the obstacle, the likelihood that Ryan would step aside if asked, the likelihood that he wouldn't, the alternatives. "This doesn't involve you," Reeves said. "I work on this floor," Ryan said. "Everything that happens here involves me. Step aside." "No." Reeves moved. He was 53 years old and not small, and he moved with the particular urgency of someone who had run out of patience for obstacles. Ryan had spent 11 years doing physical work in tight spaces, and he had the build of a man who lifted and climbed and carried as a professional matter, and the corridor was narrow enough that sidestepping wasn't a real option for either of them. What happened was not clean or controlled. Reeves shoved, and Ryan caught the shove and shoved back, and Reeves went into the wall hard enough to knock a utility panel cover loose, and then Reeves got a forearm across Ryan's throat, and Ryan's back hit the opposite wall, and they were locked in the specific ugly way of two people in a narrow space who were not trained fighters attempting to do something that required training. Ryan's left shoulder was 8 days out from the sprain. It registered this situation with a brief, sharp opinion. He ignored the opinion. He got a hand on Reeves's coat lapel and used the wall behind him as leverage and pivoted, and Reeves's momentum carried him sideways and down, and Ryan put a knee on the floor and kept the lapel grip, and they ended up with Reeves on his side, and Ryan above him and his forearm across Reeves's shoulders, applying enough pressure to make standing up a significant project. Reeves stopped moving. He was breathing hard. Ryan was breathing hard. "Don't," Ryan said. Reeves went still. Torres arrived 45 seconds later with 2 other security personnel, which Ryan knew because he heard the stairwell door open at the end of the corridor. She'd taken the stairs when the elevator was confirmed occupied, and then her footsteps and the footsteps of the 2 officers with her. "Walker." Her voice was controlled in the way of a professional who was processing 3 things at once. "Are you injured?" "Shoulder," he said. "I'm fine." "Let go." "We have him." Ryan stood up and moved back. The officers took over, and Reeves, who had apparently expended his available fight in the corridor, submitted to the process with the specific deflation of someone whose last available move had just been taken from him. Torres stood beside Ryan while the officers handled Reeves. She looked at Ryan's shoulder, at the wall where the utility panel cover had come loose, at Ryan's expression. "I told you not to engage," she said. He was moving toward her. "I know." A pause. "Good call on the service elevator log." "You would have found it." 30 seconds later, maybe. He would have had a head start. She watched the officers move Reeves toward the main elevator. "Your shoulder." "It's the same one." "Of course it is." Olivia came out of the conference room when Torres knocked and identified herself, and the first thing she did was look at Ryan's arm, which he was holding against his chest, and the second thing she did was say his name in a tone that wasn't her professional voice at all. "I'm okay," he said immediately. "Your shoulder." "It'll be fine." "Ryan?" She said it the way she'd said it the night before the launch, plain and direct, with the layer stripped off. "How bad is it?" "Worse than this morning," he admitted. "Better than November." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he didn't have a category for yet. Something compressed and careful, and underneath it something that had been running below the surface of their entire acquaintance and was now visibly present in a way it hadn't been before. "Come sit down," she said. "I should document—" "Ryan." Her hand went to his right arm briefly, the gesture she'd used to help him up on the stage in November. "Come sit down." Came and sat down. They were in the main corridor near the internal conference room, not the most elegant venue, but the security team was processing the situation at the service elevator end of the hall, and the rest of the floor had cleared. Sandra had apparently sensed that this was a moment to be elsewhere, and was elsewhere. It was just the 2 of them in the corridor's winter afternoon light, Ryan on a bench that existed for this specific kind of moment, and Olivia beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. "That's the 2nd time," she said. "3rd, if you count the bolt." She looked at him. "Finding the bolt is not the same as putting yourself between me and—" "I know." He looked at his hand in his lap, the right one, the one that worked. I told myself both times that it was just paying attention, just doing the job, the right thing that happened to be in front of me. And now? He looked up at her. Now I think I was being dishonest with myself. Olivia was quiet. I'm not telling you that so you'll feel obligated to anything, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm just done pretending it's something smaller than it is. She looked at him for a long, careful moment. Then she said, I visited my father on Wednesday. The shift surprised him slightly. He followed it. How was that? Hard. Good, eventually. She looked at the corridor windows. He asked me if I was okay. Not about the company, about me. He hasn't asked me that in a long time. She paused. I told him about the investigation, about Reeves, the launch, all of it. He already knew most of it from the news, but I told him the parts that weren't in the news. What did he say? He said he was sorry, that he'd known the board had problems, and he'd underestimated how far those problems were willing to go. She paused. You were right, about both things being true. He trusted me, and he also didn't prepare me completely. He said he was sorry for both. Ryan nodded. I asked him something, Olivia said. I asked him what the most important decision he ever made for the company was. She looked at her hands. He said it wasn't a strategic decision. He said it was the decision, early on, to build it with people he actually trusted, not people who were impressive or connected, but people he trusted to act correctly when no one was watching. Ryan was quiet. I thought about you, Shan, she said. He looked at her. When he said that, I thought about you. She met his eyes, and the careful management that usually lived in her expression was gone, fully, without residue. And I thought about the camera gap, and the bolt, and November, and today. And I thought about a maintenance technician who put a thing in a folder on his phone because it didn't feel right, even though the official verdict was that it was nothing, even though no one asked him to. She paused. That's the decision my father was talking about. It's not about credentials or position. It's about what a person does when no one is watching. Ryan looked at her in the December corridor light. I see you, she said simply. I want you to know that. Whatever this is and wherever it goes, I see you. He didn't say anything right away. He sat with it, which was the right response, the one the moment deserved, not filling it with something reflexive but just letting it land and be what it was. I see you too, he said. I have been for a while. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one, relief or something releasing that had been held for a long time. We're going to be complicated, she said. I want to be honest about that. The company, the history, the way things look to people, it's going to be complicated. I know. I'm bad at the personal side of things. I've said that. You've been practicing, he said. She looked at him with the actual smile, the full one, not the almost. And it was the third time he'd seen it, and it still reorganized something in the room. I have, she said. Apparently. The weeks between Reeves's second arrest and Christmas were legally busy and personally quiet. Reeves was taken into custody without bail after the parking structure and service corridor incident, the bail violation adding considerable weight to the existing charges. Farrow and the two external contractors had retained separate legal teams, and the forensic accounting process churned through its careful work in the background. Marcus Chen was in daily contact with law enforcement and Sterling's legal team. The board, now significantly restructured by the departures and the ongoing investigation, held a special session in mid-December at which Olivia's leadership was formally affirmed by a vote of 9-0. The remaining members making the kind of unanimous decision that people make when the alternative is being publicly associated with what Reeves and Farrow had arranged. Ryan read about the board vote in the brief news summary he checked in the mornings. He texted Olivia, 9-0, told you so. She replied after a few minutes, don't be smug, and then 30 seconds later, but thank you. He was grinning at his phone in the break room when Dale walked in and looked at him with the expression of a man who had known Ryan Walker for 8 months and was encountering something new. What? Ryan said. Nothing, Dale said, getting his coffee. Just haven't seen that face before. Ryan put his phone away. I'm in a good mood. Yeah, I got that. Dale stirred his coffee. Good. You've earned it. He told Emma carefully and slowly over the course of 2 Sunday mornings in December. The first one, he told her that he'd made a friend at work. A real one, not just someone he worked with. Emma had looked at him with the careful assessment. She gave all important information and asked, "Is it a lady friend?" Ryan had said yes. Emma had been quiet for a moment, then gone back to her cereal. The second Sunday, Emma said out of nowhere while he was making pancakes, "Does she know about me?" "She does," Ryan said. "What did you tell her?" "That you're serious and patient and you have opinions you hold a long time before you say them." He flipped a pancake. "And that you're getting better at fractions." Emma thought about this. "Does she like kids?" "I think she's still figuring that out," Ryan said honestly. Emma nodded, accepting this. "That's okay," she said. "I'm still figuring out a lot of things too." He put the pancakes on the table and sat down and thought that sometimes the most perceptive people in his life were 6 years old. "Her name is Olivia," he said. Emma repeated it carefully, trying the weight of it. "Olivia." "Yeah." "That's a pretty name," Emma said and started eating. The first time Olivia and Emma were in the same room was not staged. Ryan had never particularly believed in staging things, partly because staged things had a quality that children detected immediately and responded to with the specific skepticism of small people who had not yet learned to pretend. It happened because of a Thursday evening in late December when Ryan's car wouldn't start in the building's parking structure. Dead battery, no warning, the particular failure mode of a vehicle that had decided winter was a good time for this, and Emma's after-school care had closed early for a holiday function. And Carla was across the bridge in traffic, and Ryan had Emma sitting on a wheeled tool cart in the parking structure eating a granola bar, while he waited for a jump start from the facilities department and doing the specific mental calculation of a single parent whose backup plans had used up. Olivia found them because she'd come down to her car at 5:30, leaving before 6, which was still unusual, and walked through the structure and found Ryan crouched at the battery terminals and a 6-year-old sitting on a yellow tool cart eating a granola bar, with the patience of someone who had decided this was fine. Olivia stopped. Emma looked at her with frank, undefended curiosity. "You must be Emma," Olivia said. Emma looked at her father, then back at Olivia. "You must be Olivia," she said. Ryan stood up. "My car died. Waiting on a jump." "I can see that." Olivia looked at the car, then at Emma, then at Ryan, with the expression of someone reorganizing their plan for the evening. "My car is 3 spaces over. I have jumper cables in the trunk." "You have jumper cables," Ryan said. "My father insisted. He said a woman who runs a company and doesn't carry jumper cables is making a philosophical error." She was already moving toward her car. Ryan looked at Emma. Emma looked at him with an expression that said, "She seems fine." Daddy, in the clear language of a 6-year-old who had already made a preliminary assessment and was satisfied. 10 minutes later, with Ryan's car running and the cable situation resolved, Olivia was standing by Emma's position on the tool cart while Ryan returned the cables to her trunk. "Do you work with my dad?" Emma asked. "I work in the same building," Olivia said. "He helps make sure everything works." Emma nodded seriously. "He's good at that." "He really is," Olivia said. Emma looked at her with the direct gaze of a child who has decided to say the thing she's actually thinking. "Do you like him?" Ryan, returning from the trunk, caught the tail end of this question and opened his mouth. "Emma," he started. "Yes," Olivia said, clearly, without elaboration, in the tone of someone who had decided that a 6-year-old deserved a straight answer. Emma considered this for a moment. Then, "He talks about you sometimes. He doesn't say he is, but he thinks about things, and then he's in a better mood after." Ryan looked at the parking structure ceiling. Olivia looked at Ryan with the actual smile, the 3rd time, 4th time, by now familiar smile, and then looked back at Emma. "He thinks about things and I'm in a better mood after too," she said. Emma appeared satisfied with this exchange. She picked up her granola bar and finished it. Ryan drove home with Emma asleep in the back seat before they hit the bridge. the city lights doing their winter work on the wet streets, and he drove quietly and thought about the way certain things, the right things, the things that were actually meant to be part of your life, had a quality of not being forced. They didn't require construction or management. They required only the willingness to stop pretending they weren't there. He had spent 4 years being careful and competent and present for his daughter and absent from everything else. And he had told himself that was enough, and sometimes believed it and sometimes didn't. And somewhere in the space between a stuck elevator button and a parking structure with a dead battery, something had accumulated that was not careful or competent or manageable. It was just true, and the only decision left was whether to let it be. He made it home. He carried Emma inside and put her to bed, which he half woke for and then resettled immediately. He stood in her doorway for a moment in the dark. Then he went to the kitchen, made tea he wouldn't finish, and texted Olivia. She approved, for the record. The reply came back in 4 minutes. "I know," she told me directly. "I respect her method." And then, after a moment, "Are you free Saturday?" He looked at the message. He typed, "Yes," and sent it before he could make it more complicated than it was. Saturday turned out to be coffee. Not dinner, not anything with the architectural weight of a first date. Just coffee at a place Olivia suggested on the east side of the city, a neighborhood spot that had nothing to do with Sterling Technologies or executive floors or any of the context that surrounded her the moment she was anywhere near the building. It was the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and a counter staffed by a young woman with paint-stained fingers who handed over 2 cups without looking up from the novel propped beside the register. Ryan got there first. He sat at a corner table and ordered and tried not to think about the fact that he hadn't done this. Sat somewhere waiting for a specific person to arrive. In years. His sister had told him, across several Sunday phone calls, that he'd forgotten how to want things for himself. He was currently experiencing evidence that she was right. Olivia came in at 10:05, 5 minutes later than they'd said, in a coat he hadn't seen before, and with her hair down, which he also hadn't seen before, and she looked like a person rather than a CEO, and the difference was significant. She spotted him immediately, came over, sat down, and picked up the menu with the focused attention she gave all information. "I've been here before," she said. "The Americano is better than it has any right to be." "I got the same thing." She looked up from the menu. "Predictable." "Efficient," he said. She ordered. The paint-stained woman brought it without ceremony. They sat across from each other in the mismatched chairs while the Saturday morning moved around them. Other people coming and going, the sounds of the street outside. A dog tied to the bike rack by the window watching the interior with enormous dignity. It was, for the first 5 minutes, slightly awkward. Ryan was aware of this and didn't try to paper over it, because awkward was what happened when 2 people who had been having real conversations inside a professional context were now having a real conversation without the context as scaffolding, and the scaffolding being gone was the point. "This is different," Olivia said, stating the fact plainly. "Yeah. I don't know how to do small talk," she said. "I'm warning you in advance. I've tried to learn it, and I consistently find it not worth the effort." "That's fine. I don't need small talk." "What do you need?" He thought about it. "Honesty. And someone who doesn't expect things to be easier than they are." She wrapped both hands around her cup, which he recognized as the thinking posture. "I can do honesty. The second one, I'm probably one of the least likely people to expect things to be easy." "That's what I figured." She looked at him across the table. "I want to tell you something." "Okay." "I haven't done this in a long time either. Dated, or whatever the right word is. I was with someone for 3 years. It ended about 18 months before my father handed me the company. And after that there wasn't room, or I didn't make room, which is probably closer to the truth." She paused. "I'm saying that partly so you understand why I'm not good at it, and partly so you know that that this isn't casual for me. I don't do casual well. I do serious badly, but I do it seriously." Ryan looked at her. "I haven't done this in 4 years." "I know. Emma's mother leaving the way she did. It did something to my sense of what was worth trying for." He held his cup. "I've been okay with that for a long time, or I told myself I was. And then I met someone who said that must be nice about liking her work, like it was a quality she'd forgotten was possible to have, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "That was a small thing to say," she said. "It was," he said. "It told me a lot." She looked out the window at the dog by the bike rack, who was still conducting its dignified surveillance of the coffee shop. "What did it tell you?" "That you were carrying something heavy, and you'd been carrying it long enough that you'd stopped noticing the weight." He paused. "I recognized it." She turned back to him. There was something in her expression that was not guarded and not performed and not managing anything. Just a person at a table looking at another person and letting what was true between them be visible. "You're the only person," she said, "who has talked to me like a person in longer than I can remember. Not like a CEO, not like a target, not like someone to be managed or impressed or leveraged. Just a person." "You are a person," he said. "I know." A pause. "I sometimes need reminding." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the dog was approached by a small child and suffered the attention with continued dignity. "So what do we do with this?" Olivia said. Not anxiously. Practically, the way she approached things that needed figuring out. "We do what we've been doing," Ryan said. "Pay attention. Be honest. Don't pretend things are smaller than they are." He picked up his cup. "And maybe occasionally get coffee on a Saturday." "That sounds manageable," she said. "I think so." She almost said something else. Then she said it. "I'm glad the elevator got stuck." He looked at her. "On the wrong floor," she said. "In October. I'm glad the button stuck." He thought about the Otis elevator and its editorial opinion about which floor he needed, about the brass placard and the stairwell sign blocked by the fire extinguisher cabinet, and the 2 seconds in the doorway that had changed the specific shape of his year. "Me too," he said. January brought the trial proceedings for Reeves and Farrow into public view, and with that came the news cycle's particular appetite for the story, which had the elements that news cycles found irresistible. A powerful woman, a conspiracy, a product launch event that had gone dramatically wrong in front of 200 witnesses, and the somewhat improbable figure of a facilities technician who had, twice, put himself in the path of the danger. Ryan did not speak to the media. He declined the 2 interview requests that came through the building's communications team with the same word he used for most things he'd decided. No. Olivia's communications team managed the public narrative efficiently, and the narrative they managed was accurate. Reeves had been identified through a combination of internal security investigation and a sharp-eyed maintenance technician's anomaly report, without going further than accuracy required. He was fine with that. He didn't need the story to be about him. The story had never been about him. What the January public attention did produce unexpectedly was a call from his father. His father, Gerald Walker, was 61 and lived in Phoenix and called his son approximately 4 times a year with the reliability of someone who had marked the calls in a physical calendar. Gerald Walker had been an HVAC technician for 30 years, retired now, with the particular quietness of men who expressed love through proximity and competence rather than words. He called on a Tuesday evening. Ryan was washing dishes. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table. "Saw your name in the news," Gerald said. "Yeah." "You okay?" "I'm fine." A pause. Gerald Walker pauses were not uncomfortable. They were just the natural habitat of a man who thought before he spoke and wasn't embarrassed by the gap. "The shoulder," Gerald said. "Better." "Good." Another pause. "You did good, son." Ryan dried a plate. From the kitchen table, Emma was humming to herself over her homework. "Thanks, Dad." "Your mother would have had a lot of feelings about it," Gerald said, meaning Ryan's late mother, who had died when Ryan was 24 and who had been the louder and more expressive of his 2 parents. "She would have been scared and proud at the same time, and she would have told you about both for about an hour." "Yeah," Ryan said, "she would have." "I'm just the proud part," Gerald said. "I'll spare you the hour." Ryan leaned against the counter. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't push it," Gerald said, and Ryan could hear the thing underneath it, the version of warmth that came from that particular man in that particular register. They talked for 20 minutes. Gerald asked about Emma, called her the kid because he'd called her the kid since she was born and wasn't changing now. Ryan told him about the fractions and the crayon situation and the parking structure meeting that had resolved to mutual satisfaction. Gerald listened with the quality of attention that Ryan had inherited, the kind that didn't require performance to be real. When they hung up, Emma looked up from her homework. "Was that Grandpa Gerald?" "Yeah." "What did he say?" Ryan set the phone on the counter. "He said I did good." Emma nodded as if this confirmed a position she'd already held. "You did," she said, and went back to her homework. Well, the forensic accounting investigation into Reeves's manufactured evidence against Olivia concluded in February, and its conclusion was what the preliminary assessment had suggested. The fabricated discrepancies were sophisticated constructions that would have been damaging if introduced without scrutiny, but under scrutiny, they came apart. The real financial record of Sterling Technologies under Olivia's leadership was, according to the forensic team's report, not only clean, but demonstrably stronger than it had been in the 2 years preceding her tenure. Olivia told Ryan about it on a Wednesday, on the 32nd floor, in the corridor outside the server room where he was finishing a cable management project that had been on the maintenance backlog for months. She came out of her office at 4:15 with the report in her hand and a quality in her expression that was not triumphant. It was older and quieter than triumph, the feeling of something you'd defended for a long time finally being confirmed not to need defense anymore. "It's clean," she said. "I know," he said. "You couldn't have known." "I knew you," he said. "I know how you work." She looked at the report and then at him. He thought he could construct a version of me that was smaller than I am. That was the whole plan. Make me look like someone who cuts corners and uses the company for personal benefit, and then eliminate me before I could respond to the picture he was painting. He underestimated you. He underestimated how much evidence I generate just by doing my job correctly, she said, which was the closest thing to bitter she'd allowed herself about all of this. 11 years of records, thousands of documented decisions. You can't construct a false version of someone who has left that much of a real trail. Ryan thought about that, about records and trails, about the way systems recorded their own histories whether you were paying attention or not, maintenance logs and security cameras, and the particular kind of person who saved anomalies in a folder on his phone. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay." "The position, the executive support technician role. Marcus created it." She paused. "I approved it. I want you to know that. The decision to promote you was mine." He'd suspected this. He hadn't known it for certain. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I want you to know that it wasn't charity. I wasn't creating something because of what happened in my office that morning. I was creating something because I had watched your work order history for 2 months, and I had a floor that needed someone who understood the difference between a logged problem and an actual problem." She folded the forensic report. "You were the right person for the job. Everything else came after." He looked at her. "I know that." "Do you?" "Yeah." He closed the cable management panel. "I knew it then too. It's not the kind of thing you can fake. I'm not that hard to read, not about work." "You're not that hard to read about other things either," she said, in the tone that meant she was giving him something. "I've been told I'm predictable." "No," she said. "You're legible, that's different. Predictable means I know what you'll do. Legible means I understand why you do it." She paused. Most people are neither. He thought about that distinction for a moment, the way he thought about all the things she said that landed precisely. Most people, he said, haven't had to learn how buildings work. Everything in a building tells you what it's doing if you pay attention to the right indicators. I just applied it to people. "And what does the building tell you about me?" she asked, in the light tone that meant she actually wanted the answer. He thought about it honestly. "That you've been running on emergency power for a long time. That the primary systems work better than anyone outside the building understands, but they've been working harder than they should have to. And that when the load normalizes," he paused, "when the thing you've been compensating for gets resolved, everything starts running closer to what it was designed for." She was quiet for a moment. "That's probably the most specific compliment I've ever received." "I specialize," he said. She looked at him with the smile, the full one, and it had by February become something he expected to see and still found entirely worth waiting for. Mapane. The trial of David Reeves began in March and moved through its proceedings with the deliberate pace of the legal system doing its careful work. Ryan testified on a Tuesday in the building's absence. The law firm had scheduled his deposition for a morning slot, and he sat across from a court reporter and opposing counsel for 3 hours and described precisely and sequentially what he had observed from the camera log anomaly through to the service corridor on a Thursday in December. He answered questions the way he documented work orders, accurately, without embellishment, without minimizing. When opposing counsel suggested that the cable tray cover displacement might have been accidental, Ryan said, "The cover had a secondary retention clip with a modified electromagnetic actuator. That modification was not accidental and was not there when I inspected the tray 2 weeks prior." And when they asked how he could be certain it was a modification rather than a factory component, he described, precisely and in terms that required some patient explanation, exactly what a factory component looked like versus a retrofit, and why the wiring configuration on the actuator was inconsistent with the manufacturer's design. Opposing counsel had moved on relatively quickly after that. He was back in the building by 2 o'clock. Sandra gave him a look when he stepped off the elevator on 32 that communicated efficiently and without words that the floor had noticed his absence and he was expected to resume normal operations. He resumed normal operations. But Reeves was convicted in April on all primary counts. Farrow pleaded before the trial concluded. The 2 external contractors received separate judgments in the following weeks. The trial coverage produced another brief news cycle, another round of declined interview requests, another call from Gerald Walker. Shorter this time, just, "Saw the verdict. Good." And Ryan, "Yeah." And Gerald, "How's the kid?" And Ryan, "Better at fractions." The practical consequence for Sterling Technologies was the completion of a board restructuring that had been in progress since November. By May, the board that Olivia had inherited, the one her father had left her with its compromised members and its patient-hostile factions, had been replaced by a body that was smaller, better aligned, and no longer operating on 2 different versions of what the company was supposed to be. Marcus Chen, whose role had evolved considerably through the events of the previous year, took on expanded responsibilities that reflected the gap Reeves's removal had created in the operational structure. Sandra, who had been quietly managing the executive floor through the entire period with the professional equanimity of someone who had decided that her job was to make the floor run and not to have opinions about the drama, received an overdue title change and a salary adjustment that she accepted without comment. Ryan's role remained what it had been since October. The same title, the same responsibilities, the same early mornings and 4 o'clock departures for school pickup. But the nature of the floor had changed in the way that things change when the underlying tension is resolved. It was the same building, same systems, same infrastructure, but it operated differently now that it was not simultaneously maintaining a professional surface and managing a concealed structural failure. He was good at noticing the difference. He'd always been good at noticing the difference. So spring came, and with it the specific quality of the city in May. The days getting longer, the light taking on its warmer angle, the kind of weather that made people in offices turn their heads toward windows with the specific longing of people who had spent 5 months inside. Emma turned 7 in May. Ryan organized a small party at the apartment. Carla and her husband, 2 of Emma's friends from school, and their parents, cake from the bakery 2 blocks over because Ryan had attempted to bake one the previous year, and he and Emma had agreed, without animosity, that it was better to leave it to professionals. He asked Olivia if she wanted to come. He asked it on a Wednesday evening in April, sitting in her office after the floor had cleared. The 2 of them in the habit of these end-of-day conversations that had become as much a part of the building's rhythm as the HVAC cycles and the elevator scheduling. She had her blazer off, which was no longer unusual. He had his tool bag on the floor, which was always present. "Emma's birthday is the 15th, he said. "I'm doing a small thing at the apartment. I'd like you to come." She looked at him. "A birthday party with her friends. And my sister and her husband. It's small." "Ryan, I've met Emma once, in a parking structure." "I know. She doesn't know me." "She asked about you twice last week," he said. "Once to ask if you were good at fractions. She's decided fractions are the appropriate screening criteria for whether adults can be trusted, and wants to ask if you had a dog. Olivia blinked. Do I have a dog? No. Is that going to be a problem? I told her you were working on it. She accepted that. Olivia looked at him with the expression that he'd learned meant she was deciding something and wanted a moment for the decision to settle before she said it out loud. I've never been good at this, she said. Which part? The part where you let people in. The part where you allow yourself to be seen by small people who will tell you what they actually think without any social filter. She paused. I don't have a template for this. Emma doesn't need a template, he said. She needs someone who talks to her like she's a person. I can do that, Olivia said. And then, can I bring something? Cake is covered. Not cake, she thought. What does she like? Books. Anything with animals or space or unexplained phenomena. She went through a phase about volcanoes. Volcanoes, Olivia said. The magma chamber specifically interested her. A beat. I'll find something. She came to the birthday party. She arrived with a book about deep-sea creatures, the Hadal Zone, Animals of the Extreme Deep, which was not strictly age-appropriate and was exactly right for Emma, who opened it and went immediately and completely silent for 4 minutes while she reviewed the photographs of anglerfish and giant isopods with the focused gravity of a scientist evaluating field data. This is a very good book, Emma said finally. I thought you might like the part about bioluminescence, Olivia said, sitting on the living room floor next to Emma, which she had done without being asked or guided, simply sat down at Emma's level because it was the obvious thing to do. What's bioluminescence? Emma asked. When something makes its own light, Olivia said. In the dark, where there's no light at all, some animals make their own. Emma looked at a photograph of a deep-sea jellyfish trailing light in black water. Why? Different reasons. To find each other. To attract things. To see. Olivia paused. Mostly to navigate in a place where there's no outside light to rely on. Emma thought about this for a moment. That sounds hard, but also useful, she said. It is, Olivia said. Both. Ryan was in the kitchen cutting the bakery cake into slices and watching through the doorway. Carla appeared beside him, took the knife out of his hand, and continued cutting while looking at the living room. She sat on the floor, Carla said quietly. I noticed. Without being asked. Also noticed. Carla finished cutting 2 slices and handed one to Ryan. She looked at him with the full weight of her having known him for 32 years assessment. She's good, Carla said. Yeah, Ryan said. She really is. There's a version of this story that ends with a formal moment, a declaration, a gesture, something cinematic that wraps the year into a package. Ryan knew from experience that life didn't work like that. Things didn't conclude. They accumulated and shifted and became what they were going to be through a series of ordinary days that only looked like turning points in retrospect. What he could say was this. By summer, Olivia had learned Emma's system for evaluating trustworthiness. Fractions were a minimum bar, but the deeper question, Emma had eventually revealed, was whether a person listened when you were talking or waited to talk. Emma had determined by July that Olivia listened. She had communicated this verdict to Ryan in the car after a Saturday afternoon at the Science Museum with the considered brevity of someone who didn't need to say more. She pays attention. He had said, I know. Emma had nodded and looked out the window, and that was that. By summer, Ryan had met Olivia's father, Robert Sterling, 71, recovered from his procedure, still sharp in the way of people who spent decades in the habit of precision. They had met at a dinner that Olivia had arranged with the specific deliberateness of someone who understood that she was introducing 2 important things to each other and wanted them to meet on neutral ground rather than in either of their natural contexts. Robert Sterling had shaken Ryan's hand and said, She told me you found the bolt. Yes, sir. She said you saved the camera log when security dismissed it. Seemed worth keeping. Robert had looked at him for a long moment with eyes that were a different shade than Olivia's, but had the same quality of direct and complete attention. "You're the kind of person who notices things and does something about them," he said. "Those aren't always the same person." "No," Ryan said, "they're not." Robert had nodded once, satisfied, and moved on to tell Emma something about deep-sea fish that she had apparently mentioned when they were introduced. And Emma had produced the book from her bag because she'd brought it, which she did now with some regularity. Ryan had looked at Olivia across the dinner table. She had looked back with the expression he knew by now as the one that meant she was happy and mildly surprised by it, which was the specific shape her happiness came in. Not triumphant or loudly expressed, but genuine and slightly astonished, like someone still adjusting to having arrived somewhere they'd been trying to get to for a long time. He understood it because he felt it too. What Ryan had learned across the particular year that had taken him from a stuck elevator button to here was that the things worth having in life were almost never the things that announced themselves. They arrived sideways through service corridors and maintenance logs and a wrong floor early morning that he'd been embarrassed about for days. They accumulated quietly in 10-minute corridor conversations and honest answers to direct questions and the specific patience of two people who had both been carrying weight alone for long enough to understand what it meant to put some of it down. He had spent years being good at fixing things for other people, and not particularly good at identifying what needed fixing in his own life. He wasn't sure that had fully changed. He was still the person who noticed problems in systems before they were visible, still more comfortable with a diagnostic framework than with an emotional one, still better at saying the true thing than at knowing what to do after he'd said it. He was 33 years old and still working on the middle version of things, the one that wasn't either extreme, and he suspected that was a project without a completion date. But he had Emma, who sat on the kitchen floor with her homework and asked the right questions at the wrong moments, and had decided at 7 years old that the correct metric for an adult was whether they paid attention. And he had Olivia, who was learning, slowly, imperfectly, with the occasional setback of someone who had spent years being the only person in a room who couldn't afford to show what she was actually feeling, how to let things be what they were without managing them into something smaller. And he had the building, the same Sterling Technologies building with its 32 floors and its aging Otis elevator and its server rooms and cable trays and HVAC zone dampers, and the northeast corridor on the executive floor where the heating had been unreliable in November and where he'd had the first conversation about diagnosis versus repair that had told him something important about the woman who would come to matter to him. He understood, with the clarity of someone who had spent 11 years learning to read structures, that buildings didn't survive because nothing ever went wrong in them. They survived because what went wrong was found and addressed before it became irreparable. The finding was the job. The addressing was the commitment. The building that stood was the one where someone had been paying attention all along. He thought about that on a Tuesday morning in June, standing in the service corridor on 32 with a cup of coffee from Phil's cart, watching the early light come through the building's east-facing windows and spread across the floor in the particular way it only did in summer. The building was quiet. The systems were running. Below him, 31 floors of people were arriving and making coffee and sitting down at desks and beginning the work of another ordinary day. Emma would be at school in 40 minutes. Olivia would arrive in half an hour, first one on the floor as always, and she would come through the main elevator and he would be here, and she would say something brief and real, and it would be, as it always was, worth whatever the particular morning had cost to get to. He had been a man who fixed things. He was still a man who fixed things. But the year had added something to that. Not a replacement, not a transformation, just an addition. The way a building that has been properly maintained gains capacity rather than losing it. He was good at noticing things. He was patient with what he noticed. He was learning, slowly and with appropriate difficulty, that those same qualities applied to the life he was building outside the building's walls. That the care you brought to a system you were responsible for could be brought to people, to a daughter who was learning that fractions made sense once you understood them, to a woman who was learning that letting someone see her clearly was not the same as being exposed. Olivia arrived at 6:48, coat on, coffee in hand, and found him in the corridor doing exactly what he was always doing, being present, paying attention, available to what was actually there. "You're early," she said. Phil's line was short. She stopped beside him and looked at the morning light on the floor. The building settled around them with its small sounds. The systems, the 11th floor elevator running its first call of the day, the building simply being what it was. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She went to her office. He finished his coffee. He started his day. Outside, the city was doing its ordinary work. Inside, 32 floors of people were beginning theirs. And on the northeast corner of the executive floor, in a building that had been attended to carefully and had survived accordingly, two people who had found each other through a stuck elevator button and a camera gap, and the specific stubborn quality of paying attention when it would have been easier not to, were building something. Not perfectly, not without complication, not in the way of stories that wrap themselves cleanly and deliver their resolutions on schedule. Just steadily, honestly, the way anything worth building gets built. One careful day at a time.